Hi, I'm Lorene. At a family party, my sister laughed and called me too poor for dessert. They sat me near the restroom. My name wasn't even on the place card, but what they didn't know was that I owned the property they were all clapping about. It wasn't the first time they tried to write me out, but this time I brought receipts. Why do the people closest to us rewrite our stories until we stop letting them? It was supposed to be a celebration. At least, that's how Mom pitched it. "Just a nice family dinner," she said over the phone, her voice all sunshine and silk, like we hadn't spent the last decade pretending I was some awkward cousin instead of her youngest daughter. I knew better than to expect warmth, but I didn't expect the napkin. The hostess guided me past the main table, past the polished oak center spread with white hydrangeas and linen napkins, until we reached a small side table tucked near the hallway to the restrooms, and there it was. A single place setting. A paper napkin with my name scratched in blue ink. Everyone else had elegant printed place cards. "You sure this is mine?" I asked, trying not to let my voice crack. "Oh yes," she smiled politely. "Mrs. Hale said this was correct." She turned on her heel before I could answer. I sat down, slowly, adjusting the hem of my dress, already regretting the effort I made. Across the room, Kelly sparkled like a Macy's mannequin, tailored suit, teeth too white, laughter just a little too loud. She waved at someone near the bar, then caught my eye for a split second and turned away like she hadn't seen me. Of course she saw me. As more family members filtered in, the air thickened with the clinking of glasses, the scrape of chairs, and that familiar undercurrent of competition. Real estate wins, Ivy League internships, retirement plans. So luxurious it's almost embarrassing. Everyone had a polished story. I had a paper napkin. The server brought bread. I reached for a slice and overheard Kelly say to Uncle Richard, "Oh, we're still waiting on Lorene. She's probably budgeting parking." He chuckled like it was nothing. That was the thing about Kelly. She knew how to draw blood without making it look like a wound. When the appetizers arrived, I made myself small. Shrimp cocktail, caprese skewers, goat cheese something, I barely touched them. I focused on breathing, staying upright, keeping the quiet in. "Have you been working lately?" my cousin Mara asked. I nodded. "What do you do again?" she added. Her fork paused midair like the answer wasn't worth finishing a bite for. "I'm in property development," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Oh," she blinked. "So like, managing units?" "Something like that." Kelly, 3 chairs away, but always listening, chimed in. "She's being modest. Lorene shows the cutest rent-controlled studios, perfect for starving students." I kept my hands folded in my lap. Dinner came and went. They talked about renovations and hedge funds and trust structures like I didn't exist. I sipped my water and waited for the part where I could leave without looking dramatic. Then the server came by with the dessert menu. Kelly leaned in dramatically, waved it away from our side of the table, and said to the waiter, loud enough for all to hear, "We'll skip dessert on this end. Budget season, right, sis?" Laughter burst like static. Uncle Richard barked. Aunt Susan gave that tight little shake of her head. Even Mom smiled, small, embarrassed, but still there. I stared at the untouched tiramisu across the table. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I was already full of humiliation. Somehow, I managed to stay seated. The fork in my hand suddenly felt like lead. My eyes burned but didn't betray me. Not here. Not for them. I took one last sip of water, then placed my napkin, my makeshift name card, beside my empty plate. "I'm good," I said to the server when she circled back. "I've had enough for tonight." But I wasn't talking about dessert anymore, as they launched into a toast about Kelly's latest donation to some coastal preservation gala. I let my gaze drift, just for a second. Candlelight shimmered off her diamond earrings, catching the angles of a woman who had everything she ever wanted and nothing she didn't take. I thought about high school. Kelly at the center of her sweet 16, me in a borrowed dress that didn't quite zip up. I remembered her voice as clearly as if it had been yesterday. "She's modest or broke?" And the way people laughed then, too. Except now, I wasn't 15, and I wasn't broke. But they didn't know that, not yet. I pushed back my chair with a soft scrape. "I'll see you all soon," I murmured. No one looked up. Outside, the wind had picked up. I walked to my car without checking my reflection, No one follows a woman like me out of a room like that. Not when they've decided she doesn't belong. But I wasn't chasing a seat at their table anymore. I was building my own. After I pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't drive straight home. I found a 24-hour gas station, parked beneath a flickering light, and sat with the engine running. I don't know why. Maybe to let the weight of the night settle somewhere besides my chest. Maybe to remind myself I still had the keys to more than just my car. The following evening, I got a text from Mara. "Mom's dinner was great. Hope you're coming to Saturday's gathering. Kelly's got a surprise planned for Kate." A smiley face followed. I stared at the screen for a while before tossing the phone on the couch. My appetite hadn't come back, but my memory had. By the time Saturday rolled around, I'd resolved to show up. Not to smile, not to forget, just to watch. It was held at Kelly's house this time. Her backyard patio was strung with market lights, glowing warm against the early spring dusk. Someone handed me a glass of champagne, and I nodded politely, finding my way to the edge of the crowd. I scanned for my mother. She was there, of course, seated front and center, as always, draped in a pastel shawl, like she was waiting for a portrait artist to arrive. Kelly stood beside her, one hand resting theatrically on her shoulder. "Before dessert," she said, raising her voice just enough, "we have a little something for our wonderful mother." The crowd hushed with rehearsed anticipation. Kelly gestured, and Daniel, her husband, stepped forward holding a silver gift bag. Inside was a beautifully framed document, a deed. The deed to a slice of Oregon woodland near the coast, a patch of green my mother had visited every year since I was 10. She called it her retreat for the soul. Applause erupted. Someone said, "How thoughtful," and another followed. Only Kelly would remember such a thing. As people leaned in to read the gift tag, I already knew what it would say. From Kelly, Daniel, and the Hale family. Not a mention of me, even though the purchase had been mine. Quietly, months ago. I had found the land, negotiated the price, filed the paperwork, paid for it in full, and instructed the seller to gift wrap the deed and send it through Kelly at my mother's request. Kelly hadn't added a cent, but she had removed something. My name. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just took another sip of champagne, which suddenly tasted like ash. Later, as the guests moved toward the buffet, Kelly motioned me over to introduce me to a few of Daniel's relatives from Bend. "This is my baby sister, Lorene," she said with the same smile you'd give a stray cat before putting it back outside. "She's still figuring out her path, one of the freest spirits I know." They chuckled gently, like they were in on some private joke. An older woman said, "It's good to have a dreamer in every family. Keeps the rest of us grounded." I nodded. "Sure does." The laughter faded into background noise. No one asked me what I did. No one asked me anything at all. Conversations swirled around foundation endowments, a cousin's winery expansion, someone's vacation home in Big Sur. Every time I opened my mouth, someone else spoke louder. It wasn't personal. That was the problem. I was used to it. Being spoken over, being described instead of being heard. It didn't hurt like it used to. It burned differently now, like a match being held too long. I excused myself halfway through dessert and stepped inside the house. I needed a moment to breathe, to stop clenching my teeth. In the hallway, I passed a shelf filled with family photos. Every frame showcased Kelly, at her graduation, her wedding, next to our mother in matching blazers at some benefit gala. My face appeared twice, once as a toddler on a tricycle, once blurry in the background of a Thanksgiving shot from 10 years ago. A ghost in my own lineage. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't take the frame and smash it, though I thought about it. Instead, I went home. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sat at the dining table. I opened the locked drawer and pulled out the manila folder labeled Pine Hollow Transfer of Ownership. My signature was crisp. My account number was clear. The final payment receipt, stapled neatly behind the deed, bore the date and wire ID. My initials were in the bottom corner. My name was there when it mattered, I whispered. They just didn't want it seen. I turned on the lamp, adjusted the angle of the chair, and began to highlight dates. I opened my laptop, scanned copies into a backup folder, and labeled each document precisely. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about keeping the record straight. Because stories, once told often enough without interruption, become truth. And I wasn't about to let them write mine out again. I didn't call anyone that night, didn't post a cryptic quote on social media. I simply worked, quietly, methodically, like a woman planting seeds. Let them toast to themselves, let them erase me from gift tags and table seats. They had no idea what I was preserving. Morning came slow, gray, and damp like most mornings in Portland. I stood at my kitchen counter, stirring instant oatmeal, staring through the steam at the blinking cursor on my laptop. Beside it, the folder lay open where I'd left it the night before. Highlighted lines, marked pages, a story no one knew but everyone had benefited from. As the oatmeal thickened, I pulled out an old shoebox from the hall closet. One that still had tape from 3 moves ago. It held old photos, scribbled notes from college, and a few folded pieces of paper I hadn't touched in years. At the bottom was what I was looking for. A copy of the graduation speech I'd written when I was 21. I had been selected as the student speaker, something only 2 people in our department ever remembered each year. My professors were thrilled. I was proud. But I never gave that speech. The same week, Kelly announced her engagement. My mother called me the night before the ceremony. "You're going to talk about your life, your goals, all those things you've worked for, and I'm proud of you, baby. But this weekend is about your sister. She's waited so long for this moment. Don't take the light off her." I hadn't even fought it. I told the dean I was sick. Sat in the audience in a dull blue dress while someone else read their mediocre essay about campus nostalgia. My mother had applauded, loudly. And Kelly, she'd kissed her fiancé and said, "See? Everything works out when we support each other." The oatmeal was cold by then. I dropped the spoon in the sink and went to my desk. I opened the document labeled Woodland Deed Timeline and began typing. Monday, site scouting. Wednesday, broker contact, price negotiation. Following week, full payment wire, filed under my name, gifted through Kelly, per request. Each line was simple, just facts. But with each one, the tightness in my chest loosened a notch. Around 11 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't check the screen. Only one person still called without texting first. "Hey, sweet pea," my mother chirped when I answered. "Hi," I said, not bothering to sit. "Kelly told me you were at the dinner. I'm glad. It meant so much to her, and to me." I said nothing. "She's getting a lot of press for that Woodland thing. Isn't it amazing what she's doing for the environment? And for my birthday, no less." I could practically hear the pearls clinking against her neck when she laughed. It wasn't a harsh sound. My mother's voice never was. That's what made it so effective. "You know how she gets, Lorene," she added lightly. "Don't stir things. You've always been stronger." There was a long pause. "She didn't mean anything by forgetting your name. Let her have her moment, okay? Don't hurt your sister." My fingers were tight around the phone. I had to remind myself to breathe through my nose. "She erased me, Mom," I said slowly. "That wasn't an accident." A small sigh. "You girls are both so different, and you've always had such strong feelings. But this is her path, her light. There's no need to make it about you." She didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. After we hung up, I sat by the window, letting the light fall in patches across the floor. I remembered other conversations just like that one. Quiet dismissals, gentle redirects. The unspoken rule, don't speak louder than Kelly's presence. I stood and went to the bathroom, faced the mirror. My reflection looked back with no expression, but my eyes were alive, sharp, tired, but awake in a way they hadn't been in years. I picked up my notebook and began a new page. Charity Gala, 2018. My presentation pitch, rejected. Kelly used the phrase word for word in her speech 3 weeks later. Grant for Small Businesses, 2019. My draft emailed to Mom. Kelly announced her plan at family brunch the following Sunday. I didn't need to yell. I needed to write. In the quiet, I heard my own voice for the first time, not trembling, not seeking approval, just mine. That night I found myself thinking about the last time I had tried to assert something, anything. It had been 5 years ago, at a charity dinner. I had offered to speak for a minute about our local food pantry. Kelly had been there too, in a red satin dress, talking to a board member about her new boutique opening. The host handed me the mic. I barely got 3 sentences out before Kelly waved over the same board member and started talking about a donation. I paused, waited. She didn't stop. And under the table, my mother's hand squeezed mine. Not for comfort, but as a signal. Stop. This isn't your moment. So I stopped. I handed the mic back, smiled like a good daughter should, but I never spoke again at any family gathering, until now. This time I wasn't going to whisper politely while being erased. I was going to write it down and make them read it. 2 days later, I showed up at the gallery. I hadn't RSVP'd. I didn't need to. Years ago, I helped secure the funding for the very building the event was held in, quietly, without a speech or plaque. The architect knew, the city knew, but my name never made it to the donor wall. I parked 2 blocks away, walked slowly under a gray Portland dusk, and stepped into the space like I belonged there, because I did. I didn't wear anything flashy, just a dark, well-fitted blazer, flats, and a sense of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Inside, everything looked curated. Reclaimed wood floors, track lighting angled just right, art that whispered authenticity with a 5-digit price tag. And in the center of it all, Kelly, laughing, glowing, floating between clusters of donors and local influencers, like she owned the air they breathed. I was sipping from a glass of water near the back wall, watching a guest examine a series of abstract pieces, when I heard a low voice beside me. "You're Lorene, right?" I turned. The man was in his 70s, sharp navy suit, eyes like someone who'd signed more checks than contracts. His name tag read, Alvin Graves. "I thought so." He nodded. "You're the one who actually backed the Alder project, that little infill development on Glisson?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" He chuckled, not unkindly. "Kelly always talks like it was her baby, but I pulled public records. It's your signature on every equity document. Quiet money, but real money." He clinked his glass against mine gently. "Smart play, by the way. That corner's going to triple in value by 2026. He moved on before I could respond. I stood still. All I could hear was the hum of distant laughter and my pulse in my ears. Someone had seen it, seen me, without me having to scream, or prove, or beg. That moment alone would have been enough. But the universe, or something crueler, wasn't done. Near the bar, I was reaching for a napkin when a woman in a satin blouse and high-heeled boots turned toward me. "So what do you even do, Lorene?" she asked, casual as if we were comparing appetizers. "I mean, you always seem adjacent to things, like around, but not really in it." I looked at her. She wasn't being vicious, just honest, or maybe parroting what she'd been told. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. And then Kelly appeared at her side, draped in soft beige and gold. Not once did her eyes meet mine. She looked right through me and said to the woman, "Oh, Lorene's a free spirit. She does all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff. She's great at supporting." I held the napkin a beat longer than necessary. "Right," the woman nodded, sipping her drink. "That makes sense?" No one asked another question. Later, after people began heading to valet or calling Ubers, I walked out the side door and circled around the building. I didn't want to be seen leaving beside Kelly. I wasn't part of her act. By the time I got home, I was out of breath, but not from walking. I turned on my desk lamp, pulled out my laptop, and logged into the private server where I stored everything, Westwind Assets, a system I built from scratch, without anyone's help or knowledge. I ran my own audits, tracked my own property trails. And just like Alvin had said, Kelly's charities were nothing more than branded facades. Legally, the LLCs belonged to her, but the capital came from my accounts, silent investments, strategic partnerships where she was the face, and I was the risk. I printed 5 pages and laid them out on the dining table like puzzle pieces. Ashcroft Commons, Harborview Green, Alder Project. Each had one common note: initial funding by L.T. Morgan. My name, my money. She'd taken the credit and left me the liability. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just filed every document into a binder marked, "if needed." Let them keep talking. They didn't know the storm was already named. I was just waiting for the wind to shift. I turned off the lamp and walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. From the window, I could still see the glow of the city, the gallery a faint blur in the distance. I'd been erased in plain sight, but strangers were now whispering the truth that my own family had buried for years. And those whispers? They were louder than any speech I never gave. I was heading for the door to get ready for bed when my phone buzzed. A text. From Kelly. Don't get dramatic. Tonight wasn't about you. Try not to repeat history. No greeting, no punctuation. I stared at it for a long moment, and then, as if I were watching a rerun of a very tired show, I remembered the last time she'd used that phrase. I'd brought a guest to a family barbecue, someone I'd been quietly seeing. Kelly had pulled me aside and hissed, "Don't make this a thing. Don't get dramatic." I had laughed it off back then. Now I typed back, "You're right. Tonight wasn't about me, but the next one will be." I didn't wait for a reply. And when I heard her heels later at the valet line, yes, we parked at the same gallery deck, I didn't step aside. She walked past me without pause, then hesitated, turned her head slightly. "Try not to make this a habit, Lorene. You've done enough of that in the past." Her tone was airy, practiced, meant to sting without leaving a visible mark. I didn't flinch, just looked at her and smiled, the kind that doesn't move past the mouth. "I'm just getting started." She walked off. But this time, the silence I held wasn't surrender. It was preparation. The drive home was silent, except for the click of my turn signals. Portland's streets were mostly empty at that hour, and so was I, on the surface. But something had shifted. My thoughts were sharper now, not spinning, focused. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, poured myself half a glass of wine, and turned on the desk lamp. I pulled out the binder I'd started earlier that week and added a fresh tab, reassignments. It only took 15 minutes to find what I needed. A scanned PDF, property transfer, 6 months old, tied to a mixed-use lot I had personally funded and registered under the Morgan family's development fund, a line item in the shared holdings, or so I'd been told. But the name on the latest deed? West Bay Properties LLC, managed by Kelly Morgan. No notice, no consent form, and certainly no vote. I double-checked the original agreement from 3 years back. My name was listed as co-founding trustee. Kate's signature was there too, albeit shakier than I remembered. I zoomed in, comparing strokes. The new document showed a nearly identical signature, but the formation date was off by a week, and the notary seal looked digitally pasted. There it was. Either my mother had signed something without understanding it, or Kelly had helped herself to something that didn't belong to her. Again. I leaned back in my chair, closed the laptop, and stared at the ceiling. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. They didn't care about feelings or family brunches or not making things a scene. They just told the truth. I folded the 2 documents and slid them into a plain manila envelope. Not to mail, just to hold. Sometimes evidence needs to breathe a little before it speaks. 2 days later, I showed up to brunch at Kate's house. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. The garden looked the same. Perfectly trimmed roses, stone pathway curved like an apology no one ever says aloud. Kelly was already there, in pastel and pearls, pouring mimosas like she ran the place. I walked over to her while she was alone near the peonies. "Got a minute?" I asked. She turned, that polite civil smile already forming. "Of course." I handed her the envelope. She didn't open it. "That's the original ownership doc from the Fremont lot," I said, voice steady. "And the reassignment paperwork you filed 6 months ago." Still no reaction. "I just want to be clear," I continued. "Either you forged Mom's signature, or she signed something she didn't understand. I'm not accusing. I'm pointing out that one of those things happened." Kelly blinked slowly. "Are we really doing this? Here?" "No, you did this. I'm just choosing not to let it rot in silence." She looked away for a second too long, then back. "You always think people are trying to hurt you." I didn't rise to it. "If this isn't reversed by next Friday, I won't be quiet next time. I'll bring the file where it belongs." "Where's that?" she asked, suddenly more clipped. "The county office," I said. "Or the press. Depends who answers first." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked back to the table, smiled at Aunt Doreen, and passed the fruit platter like nothing had happened. That evening, back home again, I went deeper. Old tax documents, archived emails, the family trust files I hadn't touched in years. And there it was. A trust fund, formed under my name, my social, titled Morgan Emergency Holding Account, established 12 years ago, supposedly for mutual family support. The only deposits came from me. The only withdrawals? Kelly. For startup development, travel consulting, health investment. Cute labels for what were essentially lifestyle upgrades. I wasn't just being excluded, I'd been financing the exclusion. I closed every account tied to the trust. The next morning I sent one email. Just one, no lengthy intro, just a subject line, correction or disclosure. The attachment was a spreadsheet, clean, simple, color-coded. One tab, line 14, column D, projected legal exposure, misappropriation of family-held funds. Kelly didn't reply. Kate didn't either. But I didn't need them to. I wasn't trying to win their approval anymore. I was issuing a warning, one they'd understand in their language. Documents, risk, public image. This wasn't about getting back what I'd lost. It was about ending the illusion that they could keep taking without consequence. If they still thought I wouldn't go public, they misunderstood the version of me that walked out of their garden. By midweek, I had gone 3 days without a response. No calls, no emails. Not from Kelly, not from Kate. Silence. The same old strategy. They'd use it like a shield and hope I got tired of shouting into the void. But that morning, while folding laundry with the TV humming in the background, a familiar name pulled me toward the screen. Up next, the anchor smiled, how one Portland entrepreneur is reviving neglected neighborhoods and community spirits with pastries and purpose. I stopped mid-fold, and there she was, Kelly, standing in a bright apron beside a community center kitchen counter, handing out neat rows of baked goods to smiling kids. My strawberry tarragon scones lined the trays, cut precisely in the same shape I always used, a design I had tested, perfected, and shared only in one place, my home kitchen. The segment zoomed in as she placed the last scone into a paper box. Kelly Hale, founder and project lead, the voiceover announced. The banner below read, Reviving Portland, one pastry at a time. Not a word about me. I didn't need to hear the rest. I muted the television. Instead of yelling or texting or marching down to the station, I logged in. I had kept my firm's social presence minimal on purpose. Westwind Properties wasn't designed to shout. It was structured to build. But now it was time to raise its voice, not in anger, in facts. The post I drafted was simple. 3 clean slides. Slide 1, a scanned property title, my name bolded, Kelly's absent. Slide 2, the original community redevelopment plan, with my signature at the bottom. Slide 3, a still shot from my kitchen security cam from 2 years ago, time-stamped, showing me baking those scones. Same shape, same glaze. Caption, Legacy is built, not borrowed. I hit publish. I didn't check the numbers, I didn't monitor shares, I didn't even scroll the comments. But within the hour, an old contact from the planning board messaged me. Saw your post, about time someone cleared the air. That afternoon the phone rang. Kate. Her voice was clipped. What are you doing? Correcting the record, I said evenly. You're making this ugly. No, I'm making it honest. There was a pause, too long to be accidental. You know how these things work, Lorene. People start digging, and you don't come out clean either. That made me laugh. I didn't spend 10 years hiding my fingerprints from what I built. She did. You'll ruin everything. Everything I didn't build? Let it burn. I ended the call. Later that evening, I drove to a strip mall on the east side. Most people would pass it without a second glance. A laundry shop, a tax office, a nail salon. But tucked in the corner was a tiny storefront with windows still taped from when I first leased it years ago for a pop-up event. It had been the first place I tested my pastries for community distribution. I'd let it go dormant. Until now. I reopened it for one day only. A charity bake sale. Everything priced at whatever people could afford. Proceeds to go directly to a tenant protection fund Kelly once bragged about spearheading. There were no fancy banners, no PR agents, no mimosas, just folding tables, handwritten signs, and the smell of real vanilla and brown butter. The first hour was quiet. Then a few faces trickled in, then more. Near closing, a little girl stood at the counter holding a scone with both hands. These taste like the ones on TV, she said. I smiled. They are, I told her. You just never saw who baked them. A soft round of claps rose from behind her. A few customers nodded. One man slipped a 20 into the donation jar without taking change. It wasn't a crowd, but it was a beginning. And as I locked up, my phone buzzed again. 2 notifications. 1. A repost of my original slides by a local nonprofit, tagging both my firm and Kelly's handle. 2. A message from one of Kelly's key donors. Would love to meet the actual developer behind Ashcroft. Let's talk. They pretended I didn't exist, but now their donors were asking who really did the work. By the following afternoon, the message from Kelly's donor was still sitting unread in my inbox, flagged but unopened. I didn't need to rush. Timing, I'd learned, was everything. That evening, as Portland's skies shifted from gold to pewter, another envelope arrived. Hand-delivered, no return address. Just my name on heavy cream cardstock. The kind Kelly liked to use when she wanted to appear more polished than she actually was. Inside, an invitation to the Ashcroft Renewal ribbon-cutting ceremony. Officially, I wasn't listed as part of the program. Unofficially, they'd already lost control of the guest list. The event was set up in front of one of the newly painted community centers, the same one Kelly had walked through on TV. The sidewalk had been swept, flowers freshly planted. Rows of chairs faced a small stage with a podium and banner, building Portland together. I arrived 10 minutes before it began, dressed in dark gray slacks, a tucked-in blouse, no jewelry. Not because I wanted to blend in, but because I didn't need a spotlight to be seen anymore. Kelly took the stage in a pearl-colored suit, her makeup flawless, her smile tighter than usual. Flashbulbs popped, donors leaned forward, local council members clapped as she began. "This project is more than redevelopment," she said smoothly. "It's about lifting up areas long overlooked. You can't leave families stuck in places like Alder Street." A few heads turned. A few more chuckled politely. I didn't. Alder Street, where I lived, where I invested, where I had built something when no one else would. Kelly's words weren't random. They were surgical. She wanted the audience to hear low income and think not me. I didn't flinch. But the woman next to me, a staffer from the city housing department, raised an eyebrow. 2 minutes later, a man in a navy vest from a local nonprofit leaned across the back row and whispered to a reporter, handing him a single page. The journalist scanned it, then did a double take. The paper showed the primary equity breakdown for Ashcroft Renewal. Line 1, West Pine Holdings, 76%. Line 2, LLC owner, L. Hale. No mention of Kelly anywhere in the legal filings. The reporter leaned toward his cameraman, who began adjusting his angle. Kelly continued, unaware. "We were inspired to create a model that not only renovates, but preserves community identity. Because home isn't just a place, it's people." As she wrapped up, the applause sounded slightly offbeat. The claps weren't synchronized. Something had shifted. "Kelly," the reporter called from stage left, "can you clarify the role of West Pine Holdings in this project?" Her jaw moved, but only her bottom lip twitched. "We've always collaborated with firms aligned in values," she said, blinking twice too quickly. "Was your sister one of them?" Kelly's head tilted, just barely. Her voice came out warm, practiced. "She's always been supportive in her own way." I didn't walk toward the stage. I walked toward the man from the nonprofit. We shook hands. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Let's step out of the noise." We sat down at a folding table under a canopy just outside the perimeter of the main crowd. A small community blog had sent a contributor. Young, serious, wearing a press badge made on a home printer. I didn't grandstand. I didn't vent. I walked him through the timeline, the filings, the development phases, the partnerships that never got named. I showed copies of permits, my permits. I let him record me saying clearly, I didn't need to be the face, I just wanted to protect the foundation. When he asked if I felt betrayed, I said, I used to think truth would rise on its own, but sometimes you have to put it on paper and hand it to someone. As we wrapped up, the city housing staffer who had sat next to me earlier approached. "Smart play," she said. "What do you mean?" "Letting her say it first," she replied. "People don't forget who tried to own something that wasn't theirs." By the time I got home, the article had already been posted. Headline: Meet the quiet developer behind Portland's most talked about renewal project. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. Others did. Dozens of reposts. Comments from people I hadn't heard from in years. She's the one who helped my aunt stay in her apartment. I knew it. I saw her working with the survey crew last spring. She doesn't brag. She builds. None of them said my name out loud, but they didn't have to. Kelly wanted the spotlight, but she forgot that the foundation carries the weight. And I built it. I didn't reply to the article. I didn't need to. That night, the repost spoke louder than any caption could, and when the third invitation came, this time from the Ashcroft Renewal Advisory Committee, it wasn't dressed in gold foil edges or followed by polite, "Hope to see you" texts from Kelly. It came through a secure email from the committee's office. Subject line: Agenda Item 3C, Contributor Clarification. Attached was a scanned seating chart for a boardroom downtown. Not a party, not a celebration, a reckoning. I arrived just after 9 a.m. The building's glass facade glared back at me, tall and clinical. Inside, I was directed to the 14th floor, where a long rectangular table faced a projection screen and a tray of untouched pastries. Kelly was already seated at one end, flanked by 2 donors and a PR rep. Kate sat farther down, in a navy blouse I remembered from a fundraiser 5 years ago, the one she'd asked me not to attend. No one stood when I entered. I didn't expect them to. I nodded once and took the open seat directly across from Kelly. I placed a single leather folder on the table. Then I waited. The chairwoman cleared her throat. We'd like to open this meeting by reviewing the authorship of a recent publication tied to the Ashcroft renewal. Kelly folded her hands. I believe this is just a misunderstanding, she began. I slid the first document out, quietly, no grand gesture, no voice raised. I believe you'll find the misunderstanding was printed in Portland Weekly, under the byline Kelly Hale. The article? Word for word from a draft I submitted to a grant proposal archive 3 years ago. I passed around both papers, one stamped with the Library of Congress copyright filing. The other? A copy of the glossy feature with Kelly's smile taking up the top right corner. The room fell into a stuttered silence. One of the board members coughed into his fist. A legal aide adjusted her glasses. Kelly opened her mouth. I didn't wait. This wasn't about inspiration, I said, calm and precise. It was theft, of authorship, of narrative, of identity. Kate finally spoke softly. Lorene, maybe this isn't the... This is exactly the place, I said, turning toward her. Because every other place, every other table, you've told me it wasn't. My voice didn't rise. If anything, it lowered. I'm not angry she wanted to write something. I'm angry she keeps rewriting who I am. The PR rep whispered something into a phone. I gave them 10 seconds. Then I opened the final flap of the folder and pulled out a contract, not a summary. The actual binding document from the redevelopment purchase, land title, banking logs, wire transfers, LLC filings, all tied to me. I placed it at the center of the table. This, I said, isn't a request for credit. It's a return to accuracy. Kelly shifted back, face unreadable. Kate stared at the folder but didn't touch it. One of the younger donors leaned forward. Is this the same property highlighted in our annual report? I nodded. Yes, the numbers check out. I suggest your legal team confirm what your PR team didn't. Another voice piped in from the side of the room. A woman in city planning. I have a copy of the zoning request here, she said, lifting a paper. L. Hale, March 2020. Someone whispered, oh my God. I didn't flinch. Kelly tried again. This wasn't about stealing. We've always shared. Family projects overlap. Then why was I never included in the credits? I asked. Why did the draft I wrote end up with your name on it, published the week after I declined your offer to co-sign your housing bill? No answer. I stood, calm, still. This doesn't need to become anything else. You now have the full truth in print and in hand. What you do next reflects on your integrity, not mine. I looked to Kate one last time. I spent years being told not to embarrass this family, that airing truth would make us look divided. She didn't say a word. So I turned to the board. But I'm not the one who divided us. I just stopped pretending we weren't. And with that, I slid the folder back into my tote, gave a nod, and walked toward the glass doors. No one stopped me. I didn't leave with an award or a plaque, but for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying any weight that wasn't mine. By the time I got home, I didn't need to check the headlines. My phone had already quieted. No new mentions, no more anonymous calls, just stillness. The week that followed unfolded in near silence. Not the kind used to shame, but the kind that settles over a room once the shouting's done. Kelly hadn't posted since the meeting. Her usual cascade of filtered brunch photos and carefully curated charity smiles went dark. Sponsors began peeling away, one after the other. A quiet statement from one foundation cited, "A reevaluation of public alignment with community values." Another simply thanked her for past partnership. I didn't forward the press releases. I didn't comment. Kate, on the other hand, resigned from the community board she'd chaired for over a decade. No dramatic farewell, no televised announcement, just a formal notice sent to the local chapter. Someone forwarded it to me with a, "Thought you'd want to see this." I didn't reply. That same morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat down at my desk, the same one where I'd filed receipts no one had cared to read. But now, the inbox pinged with messages that got my name right on the first try. From nonprofits, from organizers, from city planners who once waved me off. Now, they wanted input. They wanted me. I didn't grin or cry. I just answered. 3 days later, just after sunset, I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, 2 short raps. I almost didn't open it, but I did. Kate stood on my porch, hair pulled back, no lipstick, holding a paper bag. It was the same cloth bakery tote I'd once stitched her initials into during a Christmas market nearly 15 years ago. I'd forgotten she even kept it. "I didn't plan what to say," she murmured. "Then don't," I said, stepping aside. "Just come in." We didn't hug. I didn't offer coffee. She didn't ask. We sat on opposite ends of my small couch, watching the porch light flicker over the backyard fence. The paper bag sat unopened between us. The smell of cinnamon and clove leaked from the top. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When she finally looked at me, it wasn't with tears, just something closer to recognition. "You've always been steadier than I gave you credit for," she said. I nodded. "You never had to say it." She nodded back. That was it. No apology, no makeup dinner, but she came. And for someone like Kate, that meant something. A few weeks later, I hosted a gathering. Not at a gallery or garden, just in the alley behind the Alder Street complex. There were folding chairs, 2 space heaters, a pot of hot cocoa bubbling on a camp stove. Kids from the building ran around with paper cups of cider. Someone brought tamales wrapped in foil. Someone else, a Bluetooth speaker playing old soul tracks low enough that conversation still reigned. It wasn't fancy, but it was full. Midway through the evening, a little girl tugged my sleeve. "Is this your house?" she asked, eyes wide. I crouched beside her. "No," I said, smiling. "It's all of ours. I just helped hold the door open." She looked at me for a beat, then ran back toward her friends. No fanfare, just acceptance. Later, I walked up to the top floor of the building, the floor that used to have my name on its lease under a Shell LLC no one could trace. From that height, I could see the courtyard, the street, the pop-up tables lit by soft yellow bulbs. It was quiet and full. Back in my office, I opened a blank document. Not a speech, not a press kit, a blueprint, a new community fund, this time for women like Miss Daniels in Unit 2B, who'd worked double shifts after her husband got sick. For moms like Kira who needed childcare vouchers to finish night school. For the girl who asked if I owned the building but didn't need to know the answer. I typed the name of the initiative. Then for the first time I typed my own at the bottom. Lorene Hale. Not bolded, not underlined, just present. For once, that was enough. I didn't build it for revenge. I built it so no one would have to fight for a seat ever again. Sometimes the loudest victories don't come with applause. They come in the form of silence, finally free of pretending, of shrinking, of asking permission to exist in spaces we already earned. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that legacy isn't about recognition. It's about resilience. It's about choosing to tell your story before someone else writes you out of it. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, told to keep the peace, while others took credit for your work, know this: your quiet strength holds more power than their noise ever will. And you don't need permission to own your truth. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to reclaim your own story or support someone who did? Let's start a conversation in the comments. Type 1 if this story resonated with you, or just tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if this story didn't speak to you, I'd still love to know why. Your thoughts matter. If you're still here with me, thank you. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and deeply human, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what's next. We're just getting started. Hi, my name's Alessia. My family calls me dramatic, emotional, even ungrateful. They told people I just didn't want to be involved when they erased me from my mother's 70th birthday, when they printed my name wrong on official invitations, when they quietly rewrote the trust that was originally mine. But what they didn't say? They used my company's jets, my systems, my contracts, while telling the world I was the failure. And when I found out what they'd done, I didn't scream. I rewrote everything. But now I wonder, what hurts more? Being left out of the story, or realizing they never meant to write you in at all? They excluded me from Mom's birthday, but I'd already started rewriting my guest list. That list started the day my name vanished from the family photo wall. It wasn't a dramatic event. No announcement, just a quiet rearrangement of frames. One afternoon, I walked into the hallway in Charleston, where all the family milestones were hung, and there it was. My face, gone. A photo that used to sit right between Teresa's law school graduation and Dorian's wedding had been swapped for a Carter Foundation award from a local gala. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Mom always said, let's not make a fuss over little things. And that's what I'd become. A little thing. Easier to remove than explain. Easier to replace than recognize. Back in Atlanta, I stood by the kitchen window, phone still in hand, rereading the message. Maybe sit this one out. Just 5 words that told me exactly where I stood in their pecking order. The air outside was thick with early summer heat, the kind that makes you sweat, even in the shade. I stared at the horizon as a jet ascended beyond the trees. Its tail disappeared behind the cloud line, but my memory didn't. They didn't know. They didn't have to know. The jet belonged to a fleet under my name, leased out through a corporate web so dense not even our family attorney could trace it. It was funny how often people assume ownership looks loud. Cars, parties, plaques on walls. But the loudest kind of power is the one that operates in silence. 6 months ago, I tried to speak up about Dorian's accounting errors, the transfers to a Cayman shell company, the fake consultants. I showed them everything: spreadsheets, timestamps, wire records. Their response: a family intervention. Not for him, for me. You're causing unnecessary tension, Mom had said. We've all moved past it. Teresa chimed in with her soft therapist voice. Maybe this is your way of asking for attention. I remember every word. And the worst part? They said it in a loving tone. As if I were the unstable one. As if truth-telling was just another symptom of a daughter who couldn't let go of her need to be right. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I left. Not the room, the role. The role of the difficult one, the one they could gaslight, silence, mold. That was the night I drove back to Atlanta with the windows down and my future echoing in the silence. I poured all of it into work, the real kind, not the performative foundation nonsense they did for press photos. I restructured the company, consolidated the aviation software, pulled in new clients, bought out 2 regional charters, and folded them under my shell. They didn't notice. They were too busy planning Mom's 70th. And now, on the eve of the event, I was being told, once again, to make peace by disappearing. I won't lie, it stung. Not because I wanted a slice of cake or a seat at the table, but because after everything I did to keep the family from imploding, this was my reward. Deletion. I could have replied to the message. Something gracious, something like, I understand. That's what Alessia, the obedient youngest child, would have done. Instead, I watched that jet, my jet, disappear behind the clouds and thought, they're flying with wings I built. Let them. Just don't expect me to stay grounded while they do. But plans like that only work when you have no leverage. And I did. That night, I stayed in, poured a glass of that mid-shelf Pinot I usually reserve for guests, and sat by the window as Charleston faded behind the clouds of memory. It was gala night, family night, whatever they called it now, and I had officially been asked not to show. The irony, they were using a jet from my fleet, leased through a dummy holding account under a different name, of course. They'd never bothered to ask who owned what. They just assumed anything they used must belong to someone else with a last name that mattered. Mine only counted when it was convenient. My phone buzzed around 7:10 p.m. First came the photos, group shots, balloons, glasses raised in slow-motion boomerangs. Everyone looked like an ad for Southern Harmony. Teresa in that floor-length emerald gown. Dorian, of course, wore navy. The family's golden boy had always had a thing for looking respectable. And there she was, my mother, standing in the middle, wearing the pearl necklace I'd commissioned for her birthday. She didn't know I designed it. Carol, our longtime housekeeper, had helped deliver it discreetly. I'd made her promise not to say anything. At the time, it felt noble. Now, it just felt stupid. They captioned the photo, 3 generations of Carter strength. No mention of the 4th. Me. Then Teresa called. I stared at her name on the screen long enough for it to ring twice. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity. It's a hell of a thing. Hey, she chirped, her voice sugary and just a touch too bright. We're about to toast to Mom. Even Dorian wrote something sweet for once. Want me to put you on speaker? I should have said no. I should have said anything. But instead, I let the line stay open. And then I heard it. To the children who have never left my side, Mom began, her voice proud, polished, rehearsed. To Teresa for being my rock. And to Dorian for showing us all the power of redemption. There was no third name, no pause, not even a breath where mine might have gone. The room burst into clapping. Silverware hit glassware. Someone shouted, "Well said!" Teresa chimed in, "And to family, who always stands together." I bit down on the inside of my cheek, hard. Teresa laughed again, as if it were all so organic, so innocent, as if I hadn't spent the last year cleaning up Dorian's messes behind the scenes and running the very infrastructure that flew Mom to her spa weekends and got her charity guests home from her events. I found my voice, but only enough to whisper, "You forgot someone." I wasn't sure if I hung up or if she did. The line just stopped. I sat there for a while after that, the wine untouched, the house quiet. And I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself until now. It wasn't about being left out of a toast. It was about being edited out, intentionally. People don't have to scream to erase you. Sometimes they just smile and toast to everyone but you. And if they do it long enough, the world forgets you were ever part of the picture. They were rewriting history, while I was still alive to witness it. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. No, something else had started growing in that space. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. Control isn't about noise. It's about knowing when to flip the switch. It had taken me years to learn that. Growing up in a family where volume equaled dominance, I used to think the loudest person always won. But silence, when used intentionally, had its own weight. And lately, I'd stopped filling up every space with explanations no one was asking for. That night, I scrolled through the latest round of party photos. More compliments under Teresa's curated captions. I wasn't angry anymore. Just observant. Detached in the kind of way that comes when you realize your name isn't just forgotten, it's been quietly replaced. I clicked open the last photo she'd posted. It was a close-up of Mom, hands folded under her chin, smiling like the world made perfect sense. She wore the necklace I'd sent her, the one I had designed, the one I hand-picked each element of, from the single pearl I found in Sanibel to the gold clasp I had custom forged. Engraved on the back was a single line, LK, worth more than you know. I didn't attach a name. I didn't want recognition. That was never the point. But the caption under the photo read, "From her favorite daughter, timeless, just like her." Favorite daughter? The comments followed fast. "Teresa, you always have such impeccable taste." "She's lucky to have you." "Of course you picked it out. It's perfect." I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I zoomed in on the necklace, just to confirm it was the same one. Of course it was. That was the part that hurt. I had given it freely, and they'd taken it fully. My phone sat heavy in my hand as I scrolled back to the original invoice. The delivery receipt. The card that I'd left blank, by design. I wanted the gift to speak louder than my name ever could, but Teresa had spoken for me. And no one questioned it. I sat back, chewing over the same truth I kept bumping into. It was never about facts in our family. It was about who said them loudest, prettiest, most convincingly. They didn't need to erase me in public. They just had to let others assume I was never there. I opened my contacts and tapped Carol's number. She answered after 2 rings. "Evening, Miss Alessia." "Carol," I said slowly, "did anyone ask about the necklace?" She hesitated, and I could almost hear her shifting the phone from one shoulder to the other. "Well, your mother assumed it came from Miss Teresa." I didn't correct her. "Did you know it would play out like that?" "I suspected," she admitted gently, "but you never told me to say otherwise. And Teresa, she just stepped into the space you left blank." There it was. Teresa didn't steal the gift. She claimed the silence. And I let her. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining my choices to people who already had their version of the truth laminated and framed. After we hung up, I walked to my desk and pulled the original sketch of the necklace from a drawer. My initials were on the back of that sheet. The clasp design bore my exact proportions. It wasn't proof for anyone else, it was proof for me. They can pretend she picked it. But I knew the origin. I knew the story. And deep down, so did Carol, maybe even Mom. But it didn't matter anymore. Because if I had learned anything over the past few months, it was this. Sometimes you don't fight lies with louder truths. Sometimes you build so quietly that by the time they realize you were the architect, the entire house is already under your name. They stole credit. They rewrote history. But I was rewriting ownership, and they weren't invited to the edit room. And this time, I was done pretending to swim. I turned off the living room lamp, letting the low amber glow fade as the city lights outside flickered through the blinds. The silence inside my condo wasn't cold anymore. It was intentional. I stood by the window, arms folded, watching another of my jets take off from the private strip across the river. It was the same model I'd insisted on upgrading the fleet with, a sleeker engine, better fuel economy, and a cabin system so quiet the hum barely registered over conversation. I didn't need to guess who was on board. The tail number confirmed it. Same jet Mom had used last week for her so-called girls' retreat in St. Bart's. She'd bragged about how smooth the flight was in a text to Teresa. Teresa forwarded it to the family group chat, conveniently omitting that the carrier belonged to Elite, my company. They thought they were chartering from a boutique executive firm. In reality, they were boarding aircraft operated through 3 layers of shell companies that led right back to me. I never hid the contracts. I just didn't label them in neon ink. They never asked, and I never offered. Years ago, when I first told Dad I wanted to fly, he laughed. "That's a man's field, sweetheart. Aviation's about grit, pressure, split-second judgment. You really think that's where you want to be?" I didn't answer him then, but I knew. Teresa, on the other hand, found it charming. "Honestly, Allie, you'd ruin your skin flying around in all that dry cabin air." I think she thought she was being helpful. So I stopped telling them what I was doing. I stopped asking for space to dream. Instead, I learned how to build without applause. I started small, consulting for someone else's fleet. Then I branched out. I saw the gaps in service, the frustrations high-profile clients had with consistency and privacy. I fixed what no one else was paying attention to, and I never, not once, put my name on the top line. What they didn't know is that every time they took a trip, praised the service, or complained about a missed drink request, they were logging experiences inside a system I designed. Their names were coded as VIPs. The data sat on servers I owned. The crew that smiled at them in pressed uniforms had all signed NDAs issued through my legal team. And I stayed behind the curtain, collecting invoices and watching them float along, clueless. I opened my laptop and pulled up the latest flight plan. Carter Foundation Retreat, Nassau, Bahamas. Round trip. Departure, Friday, 8:15 a.m. Return, Monday, 4:10 p.m. Filed through a mid-tier travel agency using a front-end booking API my company had built 6 months ago. My cursor hovered over the Flag for Compliance review box. I clicked. The screen blinked. A notice went out to operations. I didn't feel a surge of power, not the way movies make you think you will. I felt quiet, balanced. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability, handed out in the language they understood best. Policy, contract, procedure. Once upon a time, I'd believed fairness could be earned with patience, that if I just worked hard enough, quietly enough, they'd eventually notice. But life doesn't reward silence. It exploits it. I checked the jet's maintenance record, confirmed the onboard Wi-Fi pinged the same cockpit modem I had installed as part of our smart route rollout. Then I marked it. Hangar 14, Charleston Executive, flagged, not canceled, not delayed, just placed under review. No confrontations, no drama, no emails that started with, "I feel." This wasn't about emotional justice. This was about positioning. Teresa once told me at brunch, after one of our rare civil moments, "You can't burn bridges. You never know when you'll need to cross them again." She was right. But what she didn't realize is, sometimes you don't need to cross a bridge, because sometimes you own the whole river. But business only stays clean when someone's watching the books. I wasn't planning to start my Monday by seeing Dorian's face. But there he was, front and center on LinkedIn, all grins and polished teeth, shaking hands with a VC guy who looked like he'd never flown commercial in his life. Carter Financial signs partnership with Montrose Equity. The headline read, "Legacy, Loyalty, Vision." I almost laughed out loud. Legacy? That man hadn't built a thing in his life. Loyalty? He was only loyal to the mirror and his own mess. Vision? If you count hiding 6 figures behind fake consulting firms as vision, then sure, he was practically clairvoyant. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. Not because I missed him, but because I remembered every sleepless night I spent fixing what he broke. When I reported the embezzlement, I thought I was saving the family from public humiliation. Instead, I became the family embarrassment. I was the troublemaker, the overreactor, the one who needed to let it go. They called it a mistake. "Creative liquidity," Mom whispered, like it was a misunderstanding, not a white-collar crime. Dad didn't even look at the numbers. I remember him leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, saying, "You sure you're not just jealous of your brother's success?" That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it told me exactly what he believed. Dorian was a builder. I was a bother. And now, my bother of a brother had taken his tarnished resume and spun it into gold. I closed the post and pulled up the internal elite logs. I wasn't doing this to snoop. I had every legal right. Carter Financial had used Elite's services for 3 previous events. I remembered because I was the one who greenlit their account. Montrose Equity was now tied to them through this new partnership. Funny thing, Montrose had used Elite for their last 3 international retreats. They loved our low-noise interiors and hyper-secure passenger manifests. My fingers hovered over their access records. Then I checked the charter logs from Nassau last year.
Montrose's CEO had praised our team's discretion so hard, he even tried to poach our lead pilot. Interesting. I opened a new window and drafted an internal compliance flag. Standard language. Pending verification of financial ethics and partner compliance under Clause 14B of our corporate trust standards. It wasn't personal. It was protocol. I had no interest in airing out Dorian's old crimes. But if his name was now tied to any of my vendors, he had to clear the same bar as everyone else. That's how systems work. Once you're inside mine, you follow the rules. Rules he thought I didn't know how to write. I remembered something Dad said once, during a heated dinner, when I told him I was drafting my own contracts. Alessia, people don't care who's right. They care who's holding the pen. Well, guess what, Dad? I was holding the damn pen now, and I was writing people out. I sent one email, just one, to the legal contact at Montrose. Subject line: Urgent, Partnership Ethics Verification. Body: Please confirm Dorian Carter's compliance with your internal anti-fraud policies to continue partnership privileges under our inter-vendor clause. No threats, no emotion, just facts. It hit their inbox at 9:37 a.m. sharp. By 10:12, their scheduler had opened it twice. No reply yet. I didn't wait. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about alignment, making sure the people tied to my operations weren't living double lives. I'd spent enough time being quiet while other people decorated themselves with what I built. Now I was putting down boundaries. Quietly, legally, precisely. Because eventually, the truth doesn't just come out. Sometimes it knocks on the wrong door with the right signature. Instead, I started listing everything they didn't know I owned. I pulled up a document I hadn't looked at in weeks. An internal chart mapping out every corporate entity tied to Elite, directly and indirectly. There were names they'd recognize: Crescent Solutions, Pine Coast Logistics, but most were ghosts. Shells stacked like Russian dolls, signed under borrowed surnames, partners of partners. I had built a network so discreet it could function in plain sight without drawing attention. That was the point. Mom's voice still echoed in my ear. It's still your brother. What she meant was, protect the family, not the truth, never the truth. I sat with that for a long time. It was just past 11, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't turn on music. I didn't need anything competing with the volume of that sentence. He's still your brother. And what was I? The enemy? The whistleblower? The disappointment? At 16, I caught Dorian funneling donation money from a school supply drive into his own private debit account. He blamed the vendor, said they miscalculated the invoices. I brought the proof, side-by-side transfers. And what did Mom say? You don't destroy someone's future over one bad decision. That line stayed with me longer than any apology. I was made to sit through an awards banquet that week. He received a community service medal. I clapped. Quietly. Like a good team player. That was the game. Lie beautifully, get rewarded. Tell the truth, get erased. This wasn't new. It was just louder now. The phone call earlier had revealed more than Mom intended. I'm not saying he was right, she'd said. But she was. Because defending Dorian's image, no matter how much of it was borrowed, was more important than recognizing who kept the foundation from cracking. My foundation. I walked over to my printer and hit print on the ownership summary. 56 pages. I watched the first few sheets slide out. The names, the timelines, the signatures. Every move documented. No drama, just ink and record. By the time the printer finished, it was midnight. I carried the stack to the kitchen table and flipped through the first 10 pages. A legal structure born of necessity. A wall built to stop their noise from bleeding into what I had to build to survive. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the ceiling. She didn't even ask if it was true. Not once during that call did she say, "Did you send it?" Or, "Was it accurate?" Because it didn't matter to her whether Dorian had broken the rules. It only mattered that I'd made someone notice. Family doesn't do that. Doesn't do what exactly? Doesn't hold each other accountable? Doesn't ask questions? Doesn't refuse to be used? I could have called her back. I could have softened the edges, reminded her of how I once used to bring her tea when she had migraines, or how I drove Dorian home drunk from a party so he wouldn't get arrested. But I didn't. Because if I had learned anything, it was this. Silence was their currency, and I was done letting them spend me. I opened my laptop and started drafting a memo, not to my family, but to my legal team. A simple note. Begin prepping internal ownership assertion, including trustee reassessment filings. No anger, no commentary, just a shift, the kind that doesn't make noise, until it does. Except this time, business included consequences. By Thursday afternoon, I was at the office, window open behind me, Charleston's skyline muted in the haze. The printer hummed in the corner, contract packets and legal addendums spilling out onto the tray one after another. I wasn't touching them yet. I already knew what was inside. Instead, I reached for a leather folder labeled Hanger Leases, Carter Family. I hadn't opened it in over a year, maybe longer. It was one of those files I kept tucked under tax agreements and special airspace permits. Important, but rarely needed. Until now. I flipped past the summary pages until I hit paragraph 17. Subclause 3, right where I remembered it. Elite Holdings reserves the right to revoke hangar access and related services with 24-hour notice under operational discretion or security concerns. Standard language, the kind of clause no one reads unless they're hunting for an out or looking for a way in. And my family? They didn't read it, they just signed. They never asked who drafted the lease. They never wondered why it was so specific, why the notice window was so narrow, why I'd insisted on adding that particular line to an otherwise generic agreement, because they didn't know I was the one who wrote it. They thought they were dealing with a faceless legal team, some assistant or vendor. Maybe someone young and eager to impress. They never imagined the clause was mine, that I built it, word by word, like a trapdoor under their feet. Just in case. While they poured champagne over ribbon cuttings and boasted about family-owned legacies, I was embedding contingencies, quiet little escape hatches no one noticed until someone pulled them open. And now, I was ready to test one. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the clause slowly, then picked up the phone and buzzed Sarah, my head of legal. I need you to issue a formal notice for Hangar 19, I said. Use the 24-hour clause. Activation. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. There was a beat of silence on the other end. You're sure? She asked, cautious but composed. Very. Reason? I hesitated, then answered with the truth. Operational security. She didn't ask which operation. That's what I liked about Sarah. She knew when to follow the rulebook and when to trust the hand holding the pen. I ended the call and opened my inbox, scrolled to the archived contracts, and cross-checked the routing logs for the jet parked at Hangar 19. Sure enough, it was the Carter family's flagship plane, the one Mom insisted on calling the Legacy. The irony didn't escape me. They'd be flying out Saturday morning. Nassau. Carter Foundation Leadership Retreat, sponsored by a company that had quietly trimmed my name out of every footnote. Not anymore. I checked the calendar. There were still a few hours left in the day, and I didn't want to rush this. I wasn't operating out of emotion. This was structure, clean, silent, effective. They wouldn't receive an alert tonight. No warning, no blinking system. But tomorrow, when they showed up with luggage and press folders and legacy branding, they'd find the hangar dark, the plane locked, and no staff on site. Just a small paper notice posted at the gate. Access temporarily suspended under operational review. Please contact your leasing administrator. They would call the number on the sheet. It would route to a department that only spoke in protocol and escalation chains. No apologies, no explanations. Because this wasn't revenge. This was architecture. They taught me to build walls to keep my mouth shut. So I learned to build systems instead. Systems that could speak without me. I packed up the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and turned off the printer. It was nearly 6. The city outside had started to flicker to life again. Car lights threading through traffic, sirens in the distance, the pulse of people who didn't know their weekend plans were about to change. But I knew. I reached for my keys. Because while they'd be stuck grounded, staring at a locked gate, I'd be airborne. Off to the next deal, my next project, my next move. They wouldn't even know what hit them until the jet didn't move. And by then, I'd already be gone. Because if silence was my crime, I'd weaponize it properly. The sky was already pinking when I stepped out of the car. I had driven straight from the office to my place in Midtown, bypassing traffic by cutting through the back streets I knew too well. The weight of the week was tucked into my shoulders, but I wasn't tired, just focused. My plan didn't need noise. It needed timing. And that part I'd perfected. I poured myself a glass of water, took off my shoes, and sat at the kitchen table where my laptop waited. Still open, glowing softly in the dim light. One more look at the schedule. 7:17 p.m. The jet's check-in window began at 7:10. I opened the family group chat. Not to speak, just to read. No one had mentioned me, of course. Mom had shared a photo of the flower arrangements for the retreat departure. White roses, navy ribbons, Carter Foundation tags printed in gold. Beneath it, Teresa replied, "Elegant, just like our legacy." That word again. Legacy. It wasn't the word that got to me. It was how easily they used it, like it had no cost, like it wasn't built on someone else's back. I stared at the screen a moment longer. Then, at 7:12 exactly, I opened a blank text and typed, "I won't be at Mom's birthday, but you may want to double-check your flight plan for Monday. Send. No emojis, no follow-up, not even my name. Let them sit with it." 3 minutes passed, then 6. Then my screen lit up. Teresa. "What are you talking about? Don't start this, Alessia." I didn't respond. Instead, I tapped into the back-end control panel for Elite Airfield Systems. Selected Hangar 19. Scroll. Tap. Override authorization? Yes. I toggled the switch. Nothing flashy. No alarms. Just a quiet shift in protocol that locked the doors, disabled fueling permissions, and froze the departure manifest in place. Then came the second call. Not from them directly, but from their assistant, Caitlin. Her voice was tight but polite. "Hi, Alessia. Sorry to bother you, but there seems to be an issue with the boarding app. The jet isn't verifying credentials for tomorrow's flight. I think something's wrong with the reservation server." "Oh?" I said, sipping my water. "That's odd. Do you happen to know who we should talk to at Elite for a manual override?" "I'll look into it," I said, then hung up. I walked to the living room and sat down, curling my legs under me as the quiet took hold. This was the part they never taught. The stillness after the switch is flipped. Not vengeance, just the calm of control. I opened a second window and composed a brief message to Marcus, our operations lead at the Ground Control Center. Flight 719 Carter. Cancel takeoff clearance. Confirm full lockdown. Don't lift without executive override. I didn't need to say anything else. He knew the weight of my words. I sat back and waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing isn't what you say, it's what you don't allow. 20 minutes later, I got the update. The pilot had attempted to log in. Credentials failed. The system responded with, "Access denied. Restricted flag triggered by internal security protocol." Their jet? Going nowhere. Their plans? Grounded. Their image of untouchable legacy? Fractured. One silent keystroke at a time. I looked at the clock. 7:41. They were probably just sitting down to dinner, wine glasses clinking, talking about their upcoming impact retreat. And I? I was at home, barefoot, in sweatpants, making power plays without ever raising my voice. They used to call me the troublemaker, but trouble doesn't look like shouting. Sometimes, trouble just looks like a quiet woman with the right passwords. If they gave me a mic, I'd use it, just not the way they expected. The next morning, My phone rang as I was stepping out of the elevator into the office. The number was familiar, Dad's cell. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in me, curiosity, maybe spite, made me pick up. He didn't say hello. "What's going on, Alessia? Teresa says you're interfering with logistics. The jet, the retreat. What the hell are you doing?" I kept my voice flat. "I'm applying internal compliance, nothing more." He was quiet for a second, then sighed. "You know," he said, "your sister's always been the likable one. Easy to work with, no drama. You make people tense." It landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard versions of that for most of my life. "You're too intense. Can you not take everything so seriously? It's just a joke." Those phrases were like wallpaper in our family's home, always there, part of the decor. So I said nothing. Let the silence do the talking. He didn't even ask if what Teresa said was true, just accepted her version and ran with it. "I'm in meetings," I said, then hung up before he could say anything else. After lunch, I checked my inbox and found a message from Paige, a friend from college who still volunteered with the Carter Foundation. "Just wanted to say hi, and wow, love that you're on the gala list. Didn't know you were speaking. So cool." I blinked. I wasn't on any list. She forwarded the digital invite. I clicked the link. There it was. Carter Foundation Annual Gala. Featured guests: Teresa Calvin, Dorian Molesky, Loretta Calvin, and Alyssa McKinnon. I stared at the name. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't even close enough to be accidental. It was a version of me that didn't exist. And she, this fictional shadow of me, was seated at a table labeled Extended Sponsors and Staff. A polite way of saying, not family. No mention of my role. No reference to the jet fleet that carried their events. No context. They didn't even bother to ask if I was coming, I muttered aloud. They just wrote me in like a footnote, a detail they had to acknowledge legally, so they turned me into a shadow to soften the edges. I scrolled down and saw the RSVP button. There were options to confirm attendance, select a meal, and, at the bottom, a checkbox. Interested in delivering brief remarks, subject to approval. I checked it. A minute later, an auto response came back. "Thank you, Alyssa. Your request to speak has been approved. Topic: Legacy." I closed the tab. They wanted me muted, misnamed, parked at the edge of their curated narrative. Instead, I was walking in with my real name and their real story. Not the version they rehearsed for the press. Not the version with ribbon cuttings and foundation slogans. The one with spreadsheets, with shell companies, with the daughter who built the runway under their feet. I booked my flight to Charleston for the gala weekend. Not on their jet, on mine. And I wasn't finished speaking. Not yet. The room was hushed, an unnatural quiet for a Carter event. For a family that prided itself on appearances and practiced applause like it was part of the bloodline, the silence felt like a power shift. I could feel Teresa watching me from her seat. Her hands probably still warm from the standing ovation she received just minutes earlier. The applause that wasn't meant for her. Not really. But I let that slide, because the real show was about to begin. I took a slow breath and let my voice carry. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. "Legacy is a word we like to toss around," I said. "We print it on brochures, hang it behind podiums, weave it into mission statements. But here's the thing. Legacy isn't just a name. It's who built the foundation you're standing on." Someone shifted in their seat. I didn't look. "Aviation partnerships," I continued. "That phrase gets thrown around too. Teresa mentioned her work with regional logistics in a recent interview, called it a family project. But I'd like to clarify a few things." A few people straightened up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folder. Thick, stapled, time-stamped. "This is the original incorporation contract for Elite Airfield Systems, dated 3 years ago. My name appears on every line. Registration, vendor sourcing, capital structuring. I negotiated the first private jet lease before anyone else in this room even knew the company existed. My voice didn't shake. Teresa did not design the system. She didn't build the logistics software, didn't sign the contracts, didn't manage the security team that screens every passenger on every elite flight. That was me. Still no reaction from the front table. Just polished smiles starting to slip. I closed the folder gently, letting the sound echo just enough. I've stayed quiet out of respect. For the family, for the image, for the illusion that we've all been rowing in the same direction. But when you build the boat and someone else tries to steer it into photo ops, you eventually have to grab the oar back. I looked at Mom. She didn't blink. I looked at Dad. He adjusted his cufflink, a habit of his when he's uncomfortable. I looked at Dorian. He was sipping water, slow, calculated. And then I looked at Teresa. She gave me a smile, brittle at the edges. The kind that says, "Let's talk about this later," in front of 100 people. Too late. Before I step off this stage, I'll say this, I added, my voice softening. If you want to celebrate legacy, start by acknowledging who actually laid the bricks. Applause didn't come immediately. Just a few hesitant claps from the back. One from someone near the bar. It grew from there, awkward and reluctant, like the crowd was trying to decide if it was safe to agree with me yet. I stepped down slowly, walked past the tables, past the marketing director from the family firm who used to pretend not to remember my name, past Aunt Evelyn, who once said at Thanksgiving, "Alessia's more of a background type, don't you think?" I walked right past the family table, and as I passed Teresa, I heard her whisper, "You made your point." I didn't stop, but I did answer. "No," I said without turning. "I just started telling the story right." But doing better meant being ready for retaliation. By the time I got back to my hotel suite, the buzz of the gala had already started bleeding into local press. Someone had live-streamed part of my speech. A trimmed-down clip was already circulating. Me at the podium, saying, "If you want to celebrate legacy, start by acknowledging who actually laid the bricks." That line was now the headline on a small Charleston news site. Comments ranged from, "Finally someone said it," to, "Why bring drama to a fundraiser?" I knew how these things worked. The truth always came wrapped in controversy, especially when it was delivered by the person everyone had agreed should be quiet. I showered, answered a few emails, declined a calendar invite from a foundation subcommittee meeting I had never agreed to attend in the first place. Around midnight, I was just about to turn off the lights when my phone lit up. Dorian. Of course. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Look," he started, tone already defensive. "I get it. You were hurt. You did what you had to do, and honestly, you were right about the Montrose thing. I messed up." I didn't say anything. "But we can fix this," he added quickly. "Just need a little help. Not even long-term. Short-term access to the trust account, just to show investors everything's still in order." There it was. Not regret. A request. Not an apology. A transaction. He wasn't sorry. He was strategic. Always had been. When we were kids, he once told me, "If you admit to being wrong fast enough, people stop asking questions." He'd lived by that rule. Made it an art. Like the time he crashed Mom's Lexus into the neighbor's fence, blamed it on a stray dog, and somehow convinced everyone I had distracted him. I spent 2 weekends grounded while he played basketball and got congratulated for staying calm under pressure. Nothing had changed. "You didn't call to apologize," I said. "You called to negotiate." Silence on the line. "I just need to show that I still have access." "And you don't," I cut in, "because you breached the agreement. Multiple times." "That was years ago." "And yet, here you are. Same behavior, different watch." "You really want to air all this in front of investors?" he snapped, dropping the performance. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Funny," I replied. "You weren't worried about public image when you were funneling fake invoices through shell vendors." He hung up. No drama, no slam. Just a quiet click. I set my phone down and turned back to my laptop, logged into the Family Trust Management portal, located Dorian's access permissions, clicked Revoke, reason for removal, repeated breach of fiduciary responsibility. A message popped up. Are you sure you want to proceed? I clicked yes. For years, I'd been told to stay in line, to play my part, to let the men handle the numbers while the women handled the image. But now I was handling both. They wanted me to act like I was part of the family business, so I did, just better. And I still hadn't played my final card. At 8:03 a.m. sharp, my phone lit up. The name on the screen was Jill, Elite's head of operations. She only called when it mattered. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the shift beneath it. Ms. McKinnon, we've received confirmation from ground crew. The Carter jet is locked. Hangar access revoked. Pilots requesting override. I glanced at the time on my laptop, still open from earlier. They're asking if this is an error. It's not, I said, standing from my chair and moving toward the window. It's business. There was a pause. Then Jill simply said, Understood, and hung up. I let the phone fall into my palm and stared out at the tarmac in the distance. Tiny planes like silver insects taxiing slowly under the morning light. From my view, the world looked organized, predictable, like rules had meaning again. One tap. That's all it took. One tap in a system I had designed from scratch. All access marked, temporarily restricted. Crew scheduling frozen. Fuel authorization revoked. Onboard Wi-Fi disconnected. Passenger manifest sealed. The note on their charter file read, pending compliance with internal audit and verified chain of command. That clause had been there from the beginning. No one reads the fine print. Not when they think they're family. Not when they believe their last name is the only clearance they need. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. No angry emails. No emotional fallout. Just a keystroke. Just the same tool they handed me when they tried to ignore I existed. I leaned over the counter in my office kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and whispered to myself, always read the fine print. That phrase used to be a joke in our family. Dad would say it whenever a bill came in with hidden fees or Mom's magazine subscription auto-renewed without warning. But it stopped being a joke when I realized I was the fine print, the part they skimmed past until they needed something. Then suddenly, I was expected to be available, agreeable, invisible. Not anymore. This used to feel like betrayal. Now it felt like liberation. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply no longer paying the price for their comfort. If they wanted the power of my resources, they had to follow my structure. No more shortcuts. No more smiling through slights. No more pretending everything's fine, just because we share blood. If they wanted to fly again, they'd have to ask. And if they didn't, well, then they'd sit grounded. Same way they made me sit for years while they passed around credit that belonged elsewhere. My assistant, Rachel, messaged me 10 minutes later. Teresa just attempted to charter through a third-party broker in Singapore. Different email, same passenger manifest. We flagged it. Access denied. I smiled. Because it wasn't just the Carter Teat GD we're locked out of. It was the entire structure. Every thread they used to pull with a wink and a phone call, cut. I had rebuilt everything they once claimed. They said I made things complicated. They called me difficult, emotional, unlikable. But the truth is, they just didn't like not being in control. They weren't used to playing by rules they didn't write. And now they were outside the system, looking in, including the page they tried to erase. The file came through on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was in my office, halfway through my second cup of coffee, when Carol's text buzzed across my screen. Found this on an old camera before I wipe it. Thought you should see. Attached was a short video. No context, no file name, just a timestamp, April 18th, 2006. I opened it out of habit. What I wasn't prepared for was the sound. Soft laughter, clinking glasses, and someone singing off-key in the background. The camera panned shakily across a garden party. Paper lanterns, folding chairs, plastic forks. Probably Mom's 60th. I recognized the tablecloths, cream with navy trim. She used only once before declaring they clashed with her aesthetic. Then the camera settled on me. 16. Awkward braces. Holding a folded sheet of paper. I was standing near the edge of the pool, hesitating. "Mom," I said softly, "can I? Just a few words?" She was smiling in another direction, glass of white wine in hand, laughing at something Aunt Evelyn had said. "Alessia, not now!" "Please, it's just a short thank you." And then came the part that hit harder than I expected. "If you can't be quiet, don't expect to be around long." My breath caught watching it. I knew the words were real. I remembered how they made me feel. But hearing them again, outside the haze of memory, felt different. The camera swung away as if nothing had happened. I saw myself lower the paper. I didn't cry. I just disappeared into the background, silently, obediently. 2 minutes later, they sang Happy Birthday and cut the cake. No one noticed. I watched the entire clip again, then again. And something in me cracked, not from pain, but from confirmation. It wasn't a one-off moment. It was a lesson. That day, I learned the cost of voice. I learned that silence was currency in our family, and if I wanted to stay, I had to keep the volume down. For years, I thought I was being dramatic for holding on to it. Now, I realized, I had simply been trained to vanish politely. I never finished that speech. I couldn't even remember what it was supposed to say, but I do remember the feeling. That sinking sense that nothing I said would ever matter, unless it made someone else look better. And that moment, 16 years old, rejected in front of a crowd that barely registered it, wasn't isolated. It was foundational. They didn't silence me. They taught me how to silence myself. Until now. I downloaded the clip, renamed it The Blueprint, and moved it to my encrypted archive. Then I uploaded it into the Trust's legal folder. Quietly, without commentary. Not to weaponize it, but to remind myself what I overcame. If they ever tried to drag me back into the shadows again, into some courtroom or public smear campaign, I wanted the record to reflect exactly where this pattern started. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. What I felt was clarity, the kind you only get when you stop trying to rewrite the past and start preserving it instead, especially not the final chapter of my own legacy. I was at my desk the next morning, sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning a vendor contract when the envelope arrived. It wasn't dropped off by courier. No digital ping or certified mail alert. Just a plain manila envelope, no return address, no handwriting on the front. It was sitting on the security desk downstairs. The receptionist handed it to me like it was nothing, but I knew. The weight of it said otherwise. I took it upstairs, peeled back the flap, and found 2 documents inside. A copy of my grandfather's will, and stapled to it, a trust amendment dated 6 years ago. I read the first page, then again slower, tracing each line like it might suddenly change. The original document named me, Alessia McKinnon, as the majority heir to the Carter family's holding company. The amendment removed me, replaced me with Dorian and Teresa. No rationale, no conversation, just a signature at the bottom. My mother's. I sat very still, staring at it, not blinking. I remembered the day she had me sign routine updates. I was 30, fresh out of my MBA program. I'd just passed my private pilot exam. I was full of optimism and corporate etiquette. She came to my condo with a leather folder and a glass of white wine. "This will simplify things," she said, as I flipped through the pages. "Just some legal streamlining, nothing to worry about." I didn't question her. Why would I? Back then, I still thought trust was something you earned once and got to keep. But trust, I've learned, is a document, not a feeling. They didn't take me out in rage or scandal. They didn't strip me publicly. They just edited me out. Silently, efficiently, and they did it knowing I wouldn't fight it. because I still believed being good was the same as being protected. I picked up the original will and scanned it into my encrypted drive. Then I did the same with the amendment. Both files were saved under a new folder: Restoration. Not retribution, just clarity. Next, I sent a message to my estate attorney. Prepare a full shareholder audit. I want every change tracked. Signatures, timestamps, who knew what and when. She replied within minutes. Understood. Initiating review. No drama, no confrontation. They'd written me out without a word, so I would let the paper speak now. Paper doesn't forget. And this time, neither would I. I wasn't going to burn the family empire. I didn't need to. I already owned its foundation. The audit wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. If they wanted to keep building stories, they'd need to answer for the chapters they rewrote without me. I closed the legal portal, pushed my chair back, and stood by the window. They thought I was too emotional, too stubborn, too difficult. But what they underestimated most was my memory. And the law. They'd made me sign away my birthright. But I'd signed something, too, years ago, when I chose to stop asking for approval. Now I was taking it back, line by line, clause by clause. They'd buried the truth beneath layers of signatures and polished language. But I wasn't just reading between the lines. I was rewriting them. Now it was just me, and the silence I'd finally made mine. I woke up that morning before the alarm. The air was still, the kind of early quiet that felt earned. I slipped out of bed, brewed coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the city, steel and glass, humming with purpose, none of it waiting for permission. At 7:05, I logged into the Elite Systems backend. 3 names: Teresa Calvin, Dorian Molesky, Loretta Calvin. I hovered the cursor over each and clicked Revoke Access. One by one, like removing keys from a ring I never agreed to carry. Under Reason for Action, I typed internal conflict, breach of ethics, financial obfuscation. Simple, impersonal, corporate. The way they liked it. No emails, no announcement, no confrontation, just clean execution. The kind they once praised me for in business settings. Efficient, unemotional, reliable. This time, it was used on them. By 7:45, the first call came in. Teresa. I didn't answer. A second call. Voicemail. What are you doing, Alessia? This is family. You've made your point. Call me back. Then Dorian texted. Unlock the damn jet. You got your speech. Don't push it. Even Mom tried. Just a missed call. No voicemail. As usual, she couldn't bring herself to speak when it mattered. I didn't respond, because this wasn't about a single plane or one retreat. This was about the system they'd spent decades exploiting, and the woman they underestimated long enough to think she'd never touch the switches. They thought I'd lash out, break down, call for a family meeting, offer one last speech about fairness. Instead, I sent one email. Subject: Carter Family System Access Update. Recipients: Family Group Thread. All Carter access to Elite Systems remains restricted pending legal audit. Any attempt to circumvent system restrictions will result in automatic federal reporting via Compliance Protocol 8B. For questions, please consult legal representation. I pressed send. Then I archived the thread, blocked the thread, turned off notifications. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the apartment. By the time I got to the elevator, the sun had fully broken through the skyline. Light spilled across the metal doors, warm and unapologetic. I took a deep breath. Their empire was still standing, but it stood on frozen ground now. And I wasn't the outsider anymore. The inconvenient daughter. The one too sensitive to be in the room. I was in the room, at the head of the table, with the passwords, the contracts, the legal trail that built the walls they never thought I'd enter. And they were locked out, watching from a distance as the machine they took credit for started closing its doors, without a sound, without a fight. Just policy and power. and a woman they tried to reduce to a footnote. The difference was, this time, the systems they once used to keep me quiet were the very ones telling them, access denied. Now it was just me, and the silence I'd finally made mine. For the first time in years, I woke without dread clawing at my chest. No barrage of notifications, no buzzing calendar reminders, or vague meeting invites laced with unspoken expectations. The apartment was quiet, sun just beginning to rise behind sheer curtains, casting long, pale stripes across the floor. My breath was steady. I could hear it, really hear it. Inhale, exhale, simple, human. The morning came without fanfare. No alarms, no pings, no urgent subject lines screaming urgent in bold red. I moved slowly but deliberately, dressed in quiet layers, packed only what I needed. No extra chargers for other people's devices, no presentation backups. Just my laptop, a leather notebook, a pen I liked, and the weightless sense that maybe I was finally, actually free. By the time I reached the airport, the city was shaking itself awake. Taxis honked more out of rhythm than necessity. Pedestrians wrapped in trench coats and headphones moved like small currents feeding into the larger tide of motion. But I wasn't headed to the usual terminal. Not Gate 47 with its burnt coffee smell and fluorescent buzz. This time, I was going through the executive wing, silent elevators, polished corridors, frosted glass. I took a seat in the lounge, warm cup of ginger tea in hand, and looked out across the tarmac. There it was. Hangar 14. Their jet, motionless, unattended. A $65 million monument to stillness, polished to a high mirror shine, its nose pointed at nothing in particular. Fueled, maintained, and absolutely going nowhere. It sat like a paused idea, once urgent, now irrelevant. It reminded me of how I used to feel. Ready, capable, waiting for someone else to clear me for takeoff, to grant me permission to be powerful. I had all the tools, the discipline, the drive. But I stayed grounded, because their version of leadership only had room for one pilot at a time, and I wasn't ever supposed to be that pilot. But now I wasn't on the tarmac, I was in the air. Rachel approached, tablet in hand, steps as confident and composed as ever. All set for Singapore, she said. Board meeting confirmed. Logistics group will dial in post-session. I nodded, eyes still on the hangar. Thank you. She hesitated. A flicker of something unspoken passed across her face. Teresa tried again this morning. Different login. New shell account. I barely blinked. And? Blocked within seconds. Of course it was. They were still trying to rewrite the story, still clinging to a version of events where I was the problem, and they were the architects of order. Still looking for back doors into a system they thought they owned. But I'd rebuilt the system. Without them. With walls and windows where I chose them to be. I didn't flinch. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. Because this wasn't about punishing them anymore. That chapter closed months ago, maybe years ago, and I just hadn't realized it until now. This had become about release, about stepping out of a structure that only worked if I kept my head down and played small, about claiming a life that didn't require me to shrink in order to fit. I stood by the window longer, watching the world move. Service crews rolled catering carts across the tarmac. Other jets taxied with purpose, their engines low and steady. People came and went. Transactions happened, routes initiated, lives expanded. And this time, so was mine. I used to believe peace came through reconciliation, that if I waited long enough, if I kept proving my value without causing disruption, they'd eventually notice. That someday we'd be around a long table, joking over drinks about misunderstandings and timing, like characters in a well-edited holiday movie. I held on to that idea like a keepsake. But peace, real peace, doesn't come from being understood. It comes from not needing to be. I considered writing one last message. Not to accuse, not to ignite, just to speak plainly. I loved you all, I just couldn't keep loving you quietly. I typed it, read it, then archived it alongside other things I'd kept. Not to use, but to remember. The blueprint video that changed everything, the original will, the audit logs, a soft record of truth, not vengeance. Because part of healing is keeping the receipts, not for revenge, but for remembrance. For the next time someone tries to make you doubt your memory. For the times you almost convince yourself it wasn't that bad. For your own clarity. Rachel returned with coffee. Jets prepped. Crew's finalizing the route. We're good to go. I took the cup and smiled. Let's fly. She smiled back. The air's clear. We walked through the corridor together, past private lounges and doors that had once required a last name I didn't have, or a favor I refused to call in. Past plaques bearing names of legacy donors I used to serve behind the scenes, making sure their seating was correct and their requests discreetly met while someone else collected the credit. At the base of the stairs, I paused. The jet gleamed. My name was on the manifest, not as a guest, not as staff. As the principal. I turned and looked back across the tarmac. Hangar 14 was still there. Unmoving, unmanned. Just steel and stillness. A monument to inertia. I inhaled. Held it. Released. Some lessons never take off. But I did. Hi, I'm Magnus. I used to believe that being the quiet one in the family meant I was safe, until my parents sent a voicemail telling me I was out of the family business. No meeting, no warning, just their voices, cold and rehearsed, like it'd been removed from a mailing list. But that wasn't the worst part. It was what came after. The name I wasn't supposed to see removed from the contract. The loan I never signed, but somehow backed the photo, cracked across my face, mailed with no return address. And then 89 missed calls. What makes a family choose silence over honesty? And when they erase you quietly, do you disappear or do you start writing your own ending? It started at 6:42 in the morning, a time too early for bad news, but apparently just right for betrayal. The snow hadn't stopped falling all night, teeny, slow flakes piling on the ledge outside my kitchen window in Spokane. I hadn't touched my coffee yet. It was still hot, but barely. I remember the way the mug felt in my hand when my phone buzzed once, screen lighting up with a missed call from Homeline and a new voicemail. I didn't think much of it. Maybe Mom reminding me to pick up groceries, or some last-minute meeting prep. I tapped play. Her voice came through measured, flat, rehearsed. Hi, we've decided to restructure the company. Effective immediately, you're no longer part of the business. You'll be hearing from our attorney. No good morning, no Magnus, not even a breath of discomfort. That was it. Just that one message. My name wasn't spoken, not even once. The hum of the refrigerator behind me grew louder than the rest of the room. It was as if the walls, the floor, the world knew something had shifted and were politely stepping back to let it happen. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding that cooling mug like it could anchor me to something that wasn't vanishing in real time. I hit replay. Slower, still no mistake, still no warmth, still not even my name. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone on the counter, voicemail still open. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the stillness, they all pressed in. I thought about every late night I spent fixing payroll when no one else even knew it was broken. About the times I refinanced my own condo to cover vendor delays without ever submitting it as a company expense. About the 3 a.m. calls I answered when Dad panicked over line item discrepancies, and the weekends I gave up when Valora was too busy preparing for investor photo shoots. None of that seemed to matter anymore. I had been erased. Efficiently. Quietly. I opened my laptop. There it was. The Q4 annual review deck. I clicked through the slides until I got to the part I knew they wouldn't delete because it was too polished to throw out. My project, my financial model, the risk mitigation strategy I'd worked on during the flu, curled up with tissues and spreadsheets. And there was my face in the background photo, no less, still cropped just enough to keep me anonymous. Below the slide, bold font, led by Valora Rhodes' executive vision. They had taken my work, my image, and stapled her name to it. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the laptop. I simply dragged the corner of the screen, hit screenshot, and saved it to a folder I hadn't touched in years. A folder I created after the first time they forgot to include me in a board decision. The folder was called Just in Case. That night, lying awake, I replayed the voicemail again. The delivery, the finality, the indifference. I remembered being 24, standing on the cold factory floor with shoes too new and a clipboard too full. Valora was in New York then, getting a crash course in branding, while I was figuring out how to read vendor contracts and calculate gross margins. They always said she had the look. Apparently, I had the silence. And I wore it well. Over the years, I took on everything they didn't want to handle: procurement, logistics, taxes. They called me the backbone, the numbers girl, the fixer. Funny how the backbone gets removed when the face wants all the credit. I didn't call back. I didn't reply. Instead, I copied the voicemail file to my encrypted drive. Opened QuickBooks from 3 fiscal years ago. Not to fix anything, but to remember the patterns, the timelines, the debt moves, the silent saves. If they wanted to pretend I was never there, I wasn't going to beg to be drawn back in. I was going to document every inch of the ground I stood on, and if they tried to bulldoze it, they'd trip on everything I left buried under their own names. I opened a blank document, titled it Audit 2023-2024, Internal Memo. Then, before typing a single word, I hit play on the voicemail once more. Not to hear the words, but to remember the tone. Because when betrayal comes in pearls and parent tones, you don't scream back. You build silence that costs. I walked in without a badge, and still, no one stopped me. They barely looked up. My heels tapped against the polished floor of the Spokane Convention Center, echoing louder than any of the polite background jazz playing in the ballroom. I moved with the same deliberate confidence I used when negotiating vendor terms, even if my stomach turned knots behind the facade. I hadn't planned to attend the gala. The invitation arrived 2 days prior, no title, no greeting, just Ms. A. Rhodes in generic font, shoved into an unsealed envelope. No mention of the role I played in saving the company from collapse that year. But curiosity has its own gravity. And so, I walked in. Alone. The check-in woman didn't recognize me. She handed me a name tag and gestured toward the banquet layout. I scanned for my table 19. It sat tucked behind a wide decorative column near the back of the room. As I approached, it became unmistakably clear. The table was directly adjacent to the restroom entrance. I could hear toilet flushes and bursts of awkward laughter filtering through each time the door swung open. The seat backs were too close to the service corridor. Every time a server passed by, I felt the vibration in the floor. One of them, a kid maybe 22, leaned down and asked with a smile, "Mom, are you with catering?" I stared at him long enough that he shifted awkwardly and walked off without waiting for an answer. At the front of the room, a spotlight flared to life. Valora appeared on stage, draped in navy satin, hair pinned into an elegant twist. The MC introduced her as the woman behind Vanden's remarkable financial turnaround. I felt the sting long before the applause started. I didn't clap. Not when the screen behind her lit up with slides I had designed. Not when her voice ran over every milestone metric I had calibrated, every forecast had personally refined at 2 a.m. while she was in Miami on brand alignment. She was celebrated as a visionary. I was seated next to the bathroom. That applause didn't sound like praise. It sounded like a door clicking shut. The next morning, I brewed my own coffee at home, stood by the window, while the snow softened the edges of the street. I logged into my bank app out of routine. No deposit. It was February 3rd. Payday. Vandeen had always deposited by 6 a.m., no exception. I waited an hour. Still nothing. I called HR. After 2 reroutes and 1 accidental disconnect, someone finally answered. "We were told finance was consolidating payroll functions," she said hesitantly. Your profile was marked as inactive. I stood still. I built that payroll system, I said, more to myself than to her. But she had already moved on to ending the call. I didn't cry. I walked 4 miles home from downtown that evening instead of taking a cab. The cold burned against my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I needed to feel something that wasn't quiet betrayal. In my apartment, I dropped the gala pamphlet on the floor, kicked off my boots, and walked straight to my desk. I pulled up my encrypted drive, opened the folder labeled Contingency. I renamed it Exit Strategy. I took a screenshot of my empty bank history, time-stamped 7:04 a.m., February 3rd, dragged it into the folder, then added a scanned image of the Table 19 layout from the gala program. I wasn't compiling revenge. I was compiling evidence. Not for them. For me. Because if I ever questioned whether I was overreacting, I needed proof that I wasn't. I needed reminders that I wasn't imagining things. On my nightstand, the name tag from the gala still sat untouched. I picked it up, stared at the cheap plastic badge with my name printed in half-broken ink. I didn't throw it away. I didn't keep it. I opened the drawer of my desk, dropped it in, and shut it softly. Then I pulled out a yellow Post-it, scribbled 7 words. You told me I don't belong. Let's see how well you survive without my shadow holding your walls up. I folded it once, tucked it inside the Exit Strategy folder. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my email before bed. And somehow, sleep came easier than it had any right to. I wasn't invited to the next meeting either. I showed up anyway. I didn't knock when I walked into the strategy meeting. I didn't need to. They all looked up, startled but silent, like they'd seen a ghost step through the doorway in full daylight. I didn't stay long, just long enough to drop a revised financial outline on the table, the same one Valora had been butchering for weeks. I turned and left before anyone found their voice. Later that afternoon, I stopped by my father's house to drop off a tax document he'd forgotten to sign. It was supposed to be a quick exchange, nothing more than a handoff at the door. He waved me in with a distracted grunt, already walking toward the den. That was Clyde never cruel, never kind, just absent in all the ways that mattered. On my way through the entry hall, I spotted it sitting neatly on the console table below the framed photo of him and Valora at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Omega watch. Black dial, leather band, vintage-styled clasp. I had saved for 8 months to buy that watch. It wasn't the price that made it valuable. It was what it meant, or what I thought it meant. Clyde glanced back and said casually, "Your sister got me that a while back. Thoughtful, huh?" I didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, offered a tight smile, and looked away before the sting could crawl too far up my face. My throat burned, but my voice held. That kind of discipline becomes muscle memory after a while. I didn't stay for coffee. I left before he remembered I was still in the room. Driving home, I let the heater run too high, hoping the dry air would suck out the weight in my chest. But my mind didn't cooperate. It wandered back, stubborn as ever. 8 years ago, I had given him that watch the week I received my first bonus as assistant controller. He'd missed an important flight a few days earlier, something about a busted clasp and a dead battery. I remembered wrapping the box myself, handwriting the tag. "So you're never late for your life." His reaction back then? A distracted thanks, maybe a half smile. He'd set it aside while answering an email about a board seat he was angling for. I told myself he was just tired, that he appreciated it in his own quiet way. But sitting there in traffic, all I could think was, did he ever even remember I gave it to him? I didn't want an answer. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my boots, dropped my bag, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. My phone buzzed twice. Unknown number, then a text. It was from Rosa. I hadn't heard from her since she retired 3 years ago. She used to keep the house running while we all lived under one roof. Rosa was more than staff. She was the one who slipped me aspirin when I had cramps, and Valora was out getting her nails done. The one who saw things no one else thought she noticed. Her message was simple, a voice note. I sat down before I pressed play. "Honey," she whispered, voice raspy, "I remember Mr. Rhodes signing that paper for you. The inheritance one. Before he passed. Your mother. She told me to keep it quiet. I shouldn't have, but I thought you'd want to know." I stared at the screen, not breathing. She meant the will, the original one. The version I found hidden in a folder 2 weeks ago. The one that named me as having 40% ownership. Unencumbered. Legally binding. Supposedly. But it had never been filed. The family lawyer claimed it was superseded. That changes had been made. No explanation. Just smooth deflection. That night, Rosa was referring to, it had to be right after the funeral. I remembered that evening. The air thick with grief and obligation. I'd gone to bed early. My mother had stayed in the study alone, said she needed to organize things. No one questioned her. She handled the estate, always had. We let her. We trusted her. Now I wondered if she'd spent that night doing more than organizing. Maybe she'd buried the truth in a locked drawer. Maybe she'd always planned to rewrite the ending before anyone else could read it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call Rosa back. Instead, I opened the fireproof safe in my closet. Inside, beneath a layer of legal files and encrypted backups, was my certified copy of the original will. I took it out and laid it flat on the dining table. Next to it, I placed a small USB drive. On it, Rosa's voicemail, saved and backed up. Then, from the kitchen drawer, I retrieved the gala brochure, the one with Valoris speech, the one where she'd been credited for my entire fiscal recovery plan. Her name, my numbers, her face, my strategy. I slipped it under the will and the drive. I wasn't gathering mementos. I was building a case. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need applause. I just needed the truth to be documented before someone tried to set it on fire. They thought I was collecting dust. I was constructing the fuse. And when someone steals from you long enough, you stop asking for it back. You start planning how to take the whole room. I didn't write back to her reply. I submitted my own. By the time Marjorie finally responded to my pointed little email, her tone was polished into something that read like concern, but felt like control. "Let's clarify everything together, dear. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding." I didn't bite. I had no interest in clarity served with condescension. Instead, I spread both versions of the will out on my kitchen table that Friday morning, sunlight leaking through the blinds and onto Clyde's familiar, stoic signature. The original, the one I found tucked inside Grandpa's storage bin, was clear and clean. 40% ownership to Magnus Rhodes. Unencumbered. The updated version filed through the family's estate attorney had me missing completely. It was as if I had never existed. I held both side by side. No legal jargon could explain it away. No oversight could justify the precision in my erasure. That was no accident. The night after Grandpa's funeral came back to me with sharp edges. We'd all gone quiet after the reception, that long afternoon of polite condolences and stiff hands on shoulders. I remember Marjorie announcing she needed space, saying, "I'll be in the study. Please don't disturb me." The drawer where she kept estate records had always been locked. Back then, it didn't occur to me to question why. Clyde hadn't asked either. He never did. Whatever Marjorie declared became family protocol. Now I saw it for what it was, a controlled edit of legacy, made behind a closed door while everyone else was still grieving. By early afternoon, I called the estate attorney, posing as if I just wanted clarification on a minor tax clause. He was too polite to sense danger. "I've sent over the official summary," he said. "Let me know if anything looks off. Though, do note the phrasing, your portion is marked as pending under performance-based review." I blinked. "Performance-based review?" I repeated. "Yes. It's language your mother requested. Kind of a flexible clause. Keeps things fair, fair." That word again. I ended the call without asking more. I'd already learned everything I needed. Suspended. My inheritance wasn't gone. It was pending performance, as if my bloodline had a probationary period. I went digging. In the back of my storage cabinet was an old tax folder dated the year Grandpa passed. Slipped inside was a post-it, Marjorie's handwriting looped in neat cursive. Update with family priorities first. It was clipped to a printed draft of the will, the same draft I had now in my hand. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of it land. Not just betrayal, but calculation. This wasn't a family error. It was a strategy. I didn't call her. I didn't storm in. I wrote an email, not frantic, not demanding. Found the original grandfather clause while sorting old files. Will let you know if I find any inconsistencies. That was it. No exclamation points, no emotion, just implication wrapped in grammar sharp enough to draw blood. Then I started the real work. I indexed every document I had ever been cut from. Financial reports where my signature disappeared. Organizational charts where my title shifted to a dotted line. Photos from press events where it had been cropped out just enough to keep the symmetry, but lose the person. Every piece told a story. Every omission had a timestamp. They thought it'd crumble. They thought it'd spiral or beg. But they forgot something critical. You don't push out the person who built the firewall. You just teach her where to dig. I renamed the drive. Again. This time, undeniable. Because the difference between being forgotten and being erased is that the latter comes with evidence, and I was done forgetting. They didn't just ignore the warning. They took it as a dare. And now, it's my turn. I walked into the quarterly review meeting without fanfarino greeting. No badge, no name placard. Just me and my steps. Steady, unbothered. No one stopped me. No one asked who I was. Either they truly believed I wouldn't come back, or they were hoping I'd be too humiliated to show my face. Both options revealed everything I needed to know. I chose a seat in the back, near the wall right behind the CFO's assistant. The same seat they used to put the interns in. That symbolic corner of the room where eyes don't wander, where voices stay quiet. But I didn't flinch. Valora stood at the front, owning the room like she'd been born in it. Her voice carried the smooth charm of a practiced politician, rehearsed, polished, pleasant. She smiled toward the webcam, where investors dialed in from across the globe, gesturing at the bright screen behind her. The image was clean, professional, a sleek slideshow of Vandian's so-called next chapter. The main slide read, Strategic Investment, Innovation through Leadership. And then came the Photo new 3D printer line. Flagship equipment we couldn't even dream of affording half a year ago. Yet, somehow, here it was, already installed and functioning. In large part, Valora said, clasping her hands together like a seasoned keynote speaker, this expansion was made possible through a generous contribution I secured from a key stakeholder relationship. Their belief in our future allowed us to pivot quickly and elevate our capabilities. The words hung in the air like perfume. Beautiful, impressive, and completely false. Because I knew the truth. That stakeholder relationship she mentioned? That was me. The funding for that printer came from an emergency operations reserve, my private LLC. A quiet contribution I never even filed for reimbursement, because at the time, they needed it more than I needed credit. And Valora? She had rewritten the script, stamped her name on the invoice, claimed the glory with zero hesitation. Not a glance in my direction, not even a pause. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my hand. I simply watched, observed, took mental notes, the kind that get filed, not forgotten. Because at the bottom right of that slide, the one with the printer photo, I spotted something most wouldn't notice. A faded string of numbers embedded in the corner. A procurement code I had memorized long ago. The same one that traced back to my bank account. The meeting ended with polite applause. Some stayed behind for polite chatter, others packed up fast. When the head of procurement began sliding his tablet into a briefcase, I walked up. Calm, unshaken. I handed him a paper copy of the original invoice. It was printed, highlighted, noted. On top was a single yellow sticky note. Incorrect recipient listed in internal report. For correction. That was all. No confrontation, No accusation, just the facts. He looked at the paper like it was radioactive, like he could feel the ripple this could cause, but hadn't yet done the math on how far it would spread. I didn't stay long enough for him to finish the equation. Back home, I replayed the live stream of the meeting slowly, frame by frame. I zoomed in on the slide again, and there it was. Lower corner, nearly hidden in red. Draft 1, A-arch, revised, crossed out, replaced by Valora, final. They didn't even bother deleting the version history, just renamed it and called it their own. I took a screenshot, dragged it into a digital folder I'd quietly been building for months. I called it Exit Strategy. Then I opened a new document. Legal letterhead, formal formatting, precision language. I addressed it not to the board, not to Valora, but directly to Vanden's legal counsel. In the letter, I detailed invoice discrepancies, procurement misattributions, reputational risks tied to inaccurate crediting of financial contributions. I never once raised my voice, but every word carried weight. At the bottom, I ended with a sentence as sharp as a scalpel. Please treat this as a request for internal clarification prior to further escalation. And I signed it, plainly. Magnus Rhodes, CPA, shareholder. Then I waited. 1 day, then 2, then 3. No reply. No call. No acknowledgement. Not even a read receipt. What did arrive was a press release complete with stock photos and marketing jargon. Legacy led by Vision. Vanden's next chapter. Authored by Valora, of course. My name? Absent. Again. I didn't slam my laptop. I didn't scream or curse. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it slowly. The sound of each swallow was louder than Valora's entire speech in my mind. They thought their silence would shrink me. They didn't know silence could cut sharper than noise. And as I looked at the screen, at the words she borrowed, and the empire she thought she built, I said it aloud, just once, into the quiet of my apartment. They were warned. Now they'll pay the cost of pretending I was never here. The more they erased me, the louder the paper trail screamed. The email came from a burner domain, but I knew the formatting, Vanden, used a very specific contract template. Whoever sent it had access to internal systems. The document was attached, unsigned, but embedded metadata showed it had already been finalized and filed. I scrolled to the last page. There, in black and white, authorized signatory family shareholder approval. The line that had once included my name, gone, replaced with Valoras. The co-signature? Quillen's initials, typed in fast, the way you do when you think no one will ever check. I didn't feel shocked. That had expired months ago. What I felt now was precision. I printed the document, 3 copies, stapled, sealed them into a manila envelope. This time, I wasn't drafting polite reminders or carefully worded clarifications. I wasn't submitting emails into the abyss of legal's inbox. This time, I was walking it in myself. I arrived at headquarters just before lunch, just early enough to catch the staff before they disappeared into the cafeteria. I didn't ask for a meeting. I didn't check in with reception. I knew the building. I helped plan its reorg. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walked straight into the finance suite, and placed the envelope on the CFO's desk. He wasn't there. No one stopped me. Inside the packet, the contract draft, the inheritance clause that Marjorie had forgotten, and a neatly typed letter requesting immediate forensic reconciliation of all financial amendments involving my name. I wrote only 1 sentence in ink at the bottom. This isn't a threat. It's a courtesy. Then I left. On the way down, I stopped at the server console outside the compliance room. Tried to log in. Denied. I dialed the internal extension for data systems. The voice that answered was a young man. I didn't know him. "I'm trying to access the ledger archive," I said calmly. He paused. Your profile's no longer valid. Finance deactivated it during the tier restructure last month." "Did they?" I said, more a statement than a question. They had locked me out of the system I designed. What they didn't realize was, I had built the firewall, but I also knew where the emergency exits were hidden. That night, I went home, pulled out a separate drive I hadn't touched in over a year. It held offline backups, vendor histories, reconciliation reports I had kept for my own sanity during chaotic quarters. I knew how to cross-compare purchase orders, track overpayments, decode soft-coded expense fields. Within 2 hours, I had flagged 2 vendor transactions, double entries, each for 70 grand, labeled as branding deployment. But they weren't tied to any campaign I recognized. I printed those too. Valoris' new public image came with a price, and it looked like they'd paid for it using the kind of budget magic that never survives audit daylight. The next morning, I returned. This time, I didn't walk into finance. I walked into legal. The firm had merged with Vanden's external counsel last year. I handed the envelope to the partner directly. His name was Clay. He wore expensive glasses and a wedding ring he hadn't cleaned since 2019. I'd like this reviewed under Section 5B of Internal Shareholder Protections, I said, calmly. He looked at the seal. We weren't notified of any changes. No, I said, you weren't. And I left. That evening, I sat on the couch, lights off, phone in hand. It rang just past 9. Keelan. I didn't answer the first time. On the second ring, I picked up. It wasn't me, he started, breathless. Valora had legal pre-clearance. She said it was just temporary. The clause was just to streamline things. I didn't interrupt. I didn't know she removed you from the vendor list, he added. I swear. You didn't know because you didn't care, I replied. You never do. He exhaled. What do you want, Magnus? For a moment, I stared out the window at the streetlights casting amber shadows on the pavement. I wanted the truth, I said, my voice steady. Now I'll settle for evidence. I hung up. By the time they realized I wasn't bluffing, the first audit request had already been submitted, and it wasn't coming from me. They thought it'd crumble, but now they're the ones asking who else they've told. The message came through at 8:17 a.m., tucked between 2 promotional emails about discounted office chairs and a spammy real estate pitch. A forward from Mia Chen, a former marketing assistant who left Vanden last quarter. Subject line, you didn't get this from me. There was no text in the body, just a single screenshot. At first glance, it looked like any internal Slack conversation. Then I saw the names Valora and a senior executive, Nolan Fields, and the words, just wait. She always breaks when she's not seen. Let her feel invisible long enough. She'll quit herself. No ambiguity. No room for misinterpretation. It was about me. My sister, me own blood-strategizing psychological erasure, with the elegance of someone commenting on weather patterns. I stared at the screen, letting the glow sting my eyes. Then I opened my notebook, flipped to the last clean page, and wrote in block letters, not quitting, not quiet. The paper wrinkled under my grip. An hour later, I was in my apartment's home office when my old CPA, Jerry, called. Magnus, he said after a beat too long. We need to talk. There's a new credit line, it's under your LLC. My stomach didn't drop. It compressed like air being forced out of a sealed chamber. He walked me through it. A $300,000 loan, tagged as support for a Texas expansion project. My name was listed as the silent co-backer. The signature attached to the application? Digitized. Did you authorize this? He asked. I didn't even know it existed, I said. Jerry sighed. Then we have a problem, not you. We. That was something. I scheduled an appointment at the bank the same afternoon. I walked in with a binder, not a purse. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed a business account manager. I nodded and was led to a glass-walled room where a man in a too-tight tie greeted me like I was an interruption, not a client. Loan ID 671223, I said. I need the application documents. He blinked. You're Ms. Rhodes? I am. 20 minutes later, the documents were on the table. 3 pages. Digital approvals. Attached was a trail of internal emails between Vanden's financial liaison and their outsourced funding agent. I skimmed until I reached Quillan's name. She won't push back. She never does. That was all he wrote. 3 lines above it, Valora's tone was more polished. Well, loop Magnus in after it's finalized. She has a history of slowing processes. Slowing processes? That's what they called cross-checking legal exposure now? I signed a records release form, collected printed copies of every document, and walked out. At home, I didn't sit down. I moved. Each file got scanned, encrypted, and uploaded into my private legal portal under a new folder, Phase 1 Liability Discovery. Then, I drafted a legal notice to the bank. Not aggressive, just surgical. I did not authorize the loan. My signature is falsified. I am formally requesting forensic verification of all documents bearing my name in this matter. I copied Vanden's board, every last one. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it buzz 4 times before I answered. Valora's voice came through tight, clipped, too careful. Magnus. I didn't let her finish. You knew. Click. No yelling. No demand. Just that. I didn't need a confrontation. I already had proof. Before I turned in for the night, I called my lawyer, authorized a full audit, uploaded every screenshot, every invoice, every name. I wasn't documenting a grievance. I was building a wall they couldn't climb over or talk their way around. My journal entry that night was brief. They spent years trying to keep me small. This isn't about being seen anymore. It's about making sure they can't hide. The more they tried to keep me quiet, the more I realized silence was their only shield. And I had just broken it. I didn't return their calls. But the audit returned their silence with questions they couldn't bury. It started with a letter from my attorney, 3 pages, tightly worded, and stamped with the firm's seal. The subject line alone was enough to make most boards sweat. Formal notice of forensic inquiry initiated by silent stakeholder. By the end of the week, Vanden's legal team had no choice but to acknowledge receipt. And under mounting pressure from external investors, the board greenlit a full forensic audit. Not a soft internal review, not some PR sweep. A real one with scope, authority, and no filters. The request included everything: financial transfers, historical asset reallocations, silent partner liabilities, especially those linked to my name or LLC. I didn't smile when I got the confirmation. I just exhaled. Finally, I powered down my phone. For 2 days, I let it all sit. No texts, no inbox refresh, no calls. Silence wasn't unfamiliar. It lived in it long enough. But this time, it was intentional. Strategic. When I turned my phone back on, the screen lit up like a warning flare. 89 missed calls. Dozens of texts. Half a dozen voicemails. Almost all from Valora and Quilon. One text said, "Please talk to us before this spreads." Another just said, "You don't have to do this. It's still family." I played one voicemail. Valora's voice cracked before she even said my name. "Magnus, I don't know how this got so far. You should have just talked to us." Talk to them? I'd been talking for years. They just weren't listening. I deleted the voicemail and opened my laptop. The Vanden website had been updated. I navigated straight to the About Us page. There was Clyde, Marjorie, Valora, of course, and a new Name Some Young Strategist out of Chicago. Creative Strategy Officer. I clicked the bio. Mine used to be there, right between Marjorie and Valora, the original architect of the finance model that saved us during the 2019 vendor collapse. Now, erased. Not just my bio, my photo, my title, any trace of me. At the bottom of the page, in small font, established by 3 generations of visionary leadership. I laughed, not out of humor, but relief. They had built their narrative, fully. Now the audit would build mine. 3 days later, I met with my legal team and Daniel's acquisition group in a quiet conference room. No windows, just binders, laptops, evidence. We sat around the table and went line by line. Duplicate payments to a boutique branding agency. 0 documentation. $140,000 unaccounted for. 2 expansion projects reported as internally financed that were actually fronted by falsified credit from my LLC without my signature. liabilities hidden under creative reinvestment. And the best part? It was all in their handwriting, their emails, their version history. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean in. I let the facts speak louder than anything had said before. Clay, one of the senior attorneys, looked over at me and asked quietly, "Is there anything else you want to add?" I slid one last document across the table. The original clause from Grandpa Will, still valid, still binding. "No," I said. "That's all." That evening, I sat by my window, feet tucked under me, sipping a glass of iced tea I'd forgotten in the freezer long enough for it to turn slushy. Then I wrote my final memo. Not to Van Deen, not to Valora, not to the board. I sent it to legal, marked confidential. Subject line, final summary, no further action required. Body. Let this conclude what never should have needed proving. I closed the exit strategy folder for the last time and moved it to archive. I powered off my phone again, not because I was tired of them calling, but because I didn't need to hear their panic anymore. I had peace now. The truth didn't need me to scream. It just needed me to stop hiding, and now they couldn't look away. I didn't return their calls, but the audit returned their silence with questions they couldn't bury. The report arrived by courier, not email. Thick, spiral-bound, and sealed in a nondescript white envelope, no logos, no labels. Just my name typed in clean black font. Inside, the findings were everything I had suspected, and worse. Unauthorized use of silent shareholder signatures, disbursements with no vendor trail, asset movement that didn't match board minutes. No criminal charges were filed. Of course not. That would have meant dragging the family name through public mud, something investors hated more than the truth. But Valora was asked to step aside from all public-facing roles. Quilon announced a temporary sabbatical to recalibrate priorities. The firm's internal ethics council had issued recommendations for restructuring. Publicly, they called it refining the culture. Internally, they called it damage control. I called it what it was: accountability. I didn't send out a statement. I didn't take interviews. I didn't post a victory-laced paragraph on LinkedIn. I read the report, closed it, filed it in a drawer marked final. That same afternoon, I received an email from Marjorie. No subject line, no formal greeting, just one sentence. "Can we meet no lawyers?" I didn't respond. I printed it, slipped it into a new folder labeled Aftermath, and returned to my cup of tea. There was no pleasure in ignoring her, but no pain either, just the understanding that we had arrived at different destinations, and hers had a door I wasn't interested in walking back through. Clyde never called, not during the audit, not after, not when I was erased from the company website, not when the press speculated about internal disputes at Vanden. I wondered for a moment whether his silence was a form of pride or guilt, whether he had chosen not to speak because he didn't know what to say, or because he knew exactly what he'd done. I didn't chase the answer. That, too, was part of the healing. A week later, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name and handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Inside, carefully wrapped, was the photo frame that used to sit in the Vanden lobby. The one with all 5 of us, Clyde, Marjorie, Valora, Quilon, and me standing in front of the original warehouse. The glass was cracked, a clean fracture running diagonally through my face. I didn't hang it. I didn't fix it. I slid it into a drawer. No drama, no fury, just one more thing that didn't need a spotlight to hold meaning. I wasn't part of that photo anymore. Not really, but I still existed outside its frame. The following Saturday, I walked through downtown Spokane with a coffee in hand, not on my way to a boardroom, but to meet Claire, a friend I hadn't made time for in years. We were having brunch, eggs Benedict and gossip, not spreadsheets and silence. I didn't bring my laptop. I didn't check my phone. And I didn't mention the company. She didn't ask. That was the gift. As we talked, I realized I didn't need Vanden's recognition to feel anchored. They had erased me from the company, but I had reclaimed my name in a place they couldn't touch myself. That night, I logged out of my encrypted archive for the last time. Not because I was finished preparing, but because I was no longer preparing to fight. Sometimes resolution isn't found in a courtroom. It's found in an empty inbox, a voicemail you never play again, a photo you choose not to display, and a voice, your own, that no longer needs permission to speak.